The night runner, the city's pulse faded as I stepped into the park. The distant hum of clubs swallowed by silence. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of salt and pine, but something felt off, a prickling at the back of my neck. I adjusted my headphones' music, drowning out the world, and kept walking. Was it the shadows shifting in the sparse lamplight? Or had the park always felt this alive, this watchful? My footsteps crunched on the gravel path, too loud in the stillness. The darkness seemed to breathe. I'd walked this route before, a shortcut through the coastal city's green heart. But tonight, the trees loomed larger, their branches clawing at the sky. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone trailing me. Nothing, just empty benches and the faint glow of a distant street. Yet the unease grew, a knot tightening in my chest, urging me to move faster. Then I saw him. A figure sat on a bench, a head hunched over a phone, its screen casting a pale light on his face. He was alone, unremarkable, just another late-night wanderer. But the bushes behind him stirred a subtle rustle I almost missed. My music pulsed, but my senses sharpened, catching the outline of another shape moving through the undergrowth, too deliberate, too quiet. Danger was closer than I thought. I slowed, my heart thudding against my ribs as the second figure emerged from the shadows. I only noticed at the last moment that somebody else was approaching him from behind through said bushes. The man on the bench glanced up, oblivious, as the stranger raised something over his head, a jagged, heavy object glinting in the dim light. Time froze. My breath caught as I realized what was about to happen. I wasn't supposed to be here. The thought hit me like a slap, but my legs kept moving, drawn forward by instinct. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy still sitting there. The man on the bench jolted, screamed, and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I yanked off my headphones, the music cutting out, leaving only the pounding of my pulse. The attacker froze his head, snapping toward me. I pulled off my headphones and just stood there, watching, not fully comprehending what was actually happening. His eyes locked onto mine, wild and unhinged, a twisted smile spreading across his face. He lifted the rock again, his body coiling like a predator, and I knew I was next. My body screamed to run, but my feet felt glued to the path. The world narrowing to that single terrifying moment. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run, when he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction. I turned, my sneakers skidding on gravel, and sprinted toward the street. I instantly turned, and I ran for my life. His footsteps thundered behind me, close, too close, the rock still clutched in his hands. Every breath burned, every second stretched, as I dodged between trees, praying for safety. I crossed the street, lungs aching, and glanced back. I could still see him behind, even after crossing the street. He was relentless, his smile fixed, eyes gleaming with intent. I veered around a corner, my vision blurring with panic, and spotted a faint light ahead, a shop still open, its windows glowing like a beacon. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked, and I couldn't speak straight. The owner, a burly man, stared as I gasped for air, pointing toward the street. The psychopath came to the store and started hitting the window with the rock, and suddenly, when the glass broke, he finally ran away. The sound of shattering glass echoed sharp and final as he vanished into the night. I collapsed against the counter, trembling, the shop's warmth a stark contrast to the terror outside. Was he gone, or just waiting in the shadows? The owner offered me water, his voice steady, but my hands shook too much to hold the glass. I waited a few minutes. I put my music back in, and I quickly walked home, carefully avoiding the park afterwards. The streets felt different now, every alley a threat, every sound a warning. I was shaking at home, locking every door I couldn't sleep well. My apartment, once a haven, felt fragile, its locks too flimsy to keep out the fear. That smile, those eyes, they burned into my memory, a nightmare I couldn't escape. The next morning, my body ached, my jaw sore from clenching. I discovered that I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. The mirror showed a stranger's face, pale, hollow, marked by the night's terror. I called my friend Ben, my voice unsteady, and told him everything. He listened in silence, then revealed a chilling truth. The park wasn't safe. I later discovered that I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence in the same city. Same park someone had been bludgeoned and killed with multiple stabs in the back, just one earlier. The news hit like a punch. Had I brushed past a saviors of the city's darkness, a killer who'd already claimed a life, I stopped going out at night, avoided the beach, the clubs, the carefree life I'd loved. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat. Every shadow, a reminder of that rock, that smile. I started researching the city's underbelly, reading about its hidden dangers, its history of violence. The beauty of the coast faded, replaced by a grim reality I couldn't ignore. Ben and his friends rallied around me, offering support, urging me to stay with them. But the fear was mine alone, a weight I carried in silence. I started walking with others, avoiding shortcuts, checking my surroundings obsessively. I'm forever grateful that this whole thing turned out okay. Obviously. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing may have actually saved both me and the guy on the bench. My presence had changed the outcome, but the cost was my peace. I left the city soon after, craving the familiarity of home. Germany's gray winters felt safer, a stark contrast to the sun-soaked terror of that summer. My online business kept me afloat, but my dreams of farmland felt distant, overshadowed by caution. I still saw him in my nightmares. His rock raised, his smile wide, chasing me through endless parks. I installed new locks, bought a small alarm, anything to feel secure. The experience reshaped me. I used to trust the world, its people, its nights. Now, I planned my routes, avoided empty spaces, kept my music low. The city's charm, its beaches, its parks, became a backdrop for something sinister, a lesson carved into my bones. I told my story to friends, to strangers, hoping to warn them. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean. Once I think that I learned that there are some situations that you really just cannot control. I tried to reclaim my life, booking trips to safer cities, reconnecting with old friends. But the park lingered a ghost in my thoughts. I'd catch myself scanning crowds, searching for that manic grin, that predatory stare. Was he still out there, hunting? Waiting for another chance? The question gnawed at me, unanswered, unanswerable. My family noticed the change. I was quieter, more guarded, less likely to wander. They didn't push, but their concern was a mirror, reflecting a version of me I barely recognized. I started journaling, writing down the night's details, hoping to purge the fear. It helped, but only so much. The rock, the chase, the broken glass, they were part of me, now a story I'd carry forever. I found solace in routine. Work, coffee shops, familiar faces, they grounded me. But the world felt less certain, its edges sharper, its shadows deeper. I avoided parks, especially at night, and checked my doors twice before bed. The man was gone, but his threat remained a whisper in the dark, reminding me to stay vigilant. Years later, I'm stronger, wiser, but not unchanged. I've rebuilt my confidence, my joy, but it's different, tempered, cautious. I travel again, but with purpose, with plans, with people I trust. The city by the sea is a memory, a warning, a story I tell to keep others safe. I've forgiven myself for walking alone, for not seeing the danger sooner. But I'll never forget the lesson. Some nights, some places hold horrors you can't predict. Now I live deliberately. My apartment is a fortress. My routes are mapped, my instincts sharp. I laugh, I love. I dream of farmland still. But I'm no longer the man who danced through a summer night without care. That man ran for his life. And what emerged was someone new. Someone who knows the cost of a single wrong step. Stay safe out there, everyone. And maybe don't walk through the park alone in a foreign city, but hey, maybe that's just common sense. The Haunting of the Lodge. The St. Charles Hilton loomed over New Orleans, its ancient Masonic bones cloaked in modern elegance. It happens to be an old Masonic lodge from the early 1900s. The building is beautiful and has been rebuilt or added onto over about 100 years. It is an 18-story hotel with ballrooms, a Masonic chapel, and a secret theater. My new wife Lila and I checked in our honeymoon, a blur of excitement. The French Quarter's vibrancy was steps away, but the hotel's history whispered in every corner. Something felt alive in the walls, watching. Our first night was restless dreams twisting into shapes I couldn't name. I don't usually have nightmares, but these felt different, vivid, heavy. The unease grew sharper. The first night there, we had some bad dreams. I don't really have bad dreams. I tend to have more lucid dreams, so it felt strange. I woke unsettled, Lila's face mirroring my own disquiet. We shook it off, diving into the city's charm. My wife and I woke up early, took the streetcar to the Garden District, and wandered through the streets for a bit. The old cemetery's stones told silent stories, the architecture a testament to time. We visited an old cemetery and checked out the architecture and some shops on Magazine Street. We roamed laughing, but by nightfall, small tensions frayed our mood. We had such a great time walking the streets that we wandered back to the French Quarter on foot. Back at the hotel, the air felt thicker. We kept exploring the town and had some food and drinks and all that. But we got on each other's nerves a little bit by the end of the night and returned to the hotel. A few drinks left us loose but not eckless. We promptly went to bed. Sleep came fast, but it wasn't peaceful. I found myself in a dream standing on the 3rd floor, our room on the 5th, forgotten. The elevator doors parted, revealing a dimly lit hall. I just came off of the elevator and peeked around the corner to a seating area outside of the ballroom. A woman sat there, her black lace dress high-collared, cradling something unseen. There was a woman dressed in a black lace high-colored dress sitting on the couch, and it looked as if she were cradling something. Her form was faded, her hair coiled tightly. My heart raced. She wasn't right. I stared. Retreating, then looking again. Her dress was old. She was dim in color, and her dark hair was up in sort of COI bun. I stared at her for a bit, pulling back, and then peeking again. The dream shifted. The elevator, yanking me to the 1st floor. Next thing I knew, I was on the elevator again, and the doors opened to the 1st floor, where there were 3 big lights glowing purple, green, and yellow, the Migra colors. The colors pulsed, disorienting. Then a jolt of panic. I was nearly bare-clad, only in absurd pink underwear. Shame burned through me, a nightmare echoing high school fears. At this point, my dream seems to change, and I realize that I'm not wearing any clothes, except my big pink granny panties, like the dreams most folks have in high school or college. I scrambled, desperate for cover. I started to panic. The only thing that I can think is that there are bathrooms on the 2nd floor. The dream warped again. The dream sort of fades again, and I'm trying to open the bathroom doors on the second floor, but they're locked. The handles wouldn't budge, my hands shaking. At this point, I remember that we have a room on the 5th floor. I hurry to the elevator, cupping myself. I rushed exposed to our room, hammering on the door. I get to the room, pounding on the door, calling my wife's name. And after a minute, she finally lets me in. Lila's face was pale, her eyes wide. We both freak out as I tell my story. I wasn't dreaming I'd been wandering the hotel, nearly naked for who knows how long. And yes, I was wandering the hotel in the middle of the night, naked for who knows how long. The door's weight meant I'd fought to open it, yet Lila hadn't heard me leave. Terror gripped us. How had I left the room? She didn't hear me leave, and the door was heavy enough that I had to work to open it. My last sleepwalking episode was decades ago, a childhood accident. Now, I have not slept walks since I broke my arm and my collarbone when I was about 4. I called the front desk, voice shaking. I called the front desks. The gal didn't want to talk about it, but assured me that nobody could get the videotapes without a subpoena. Her dismissal stung, but we calmed ourselves. Exhaustion pulling me back to sleep. We both took time to calm down a bit, and I went back to sleep. The hotel felt different now, its grandeur hiding something darker. I sought answers from security, but they dodged. One guard shrugged, saying she avoided that stuff. I tried talking about the incident with the night security gal, but she said that she doesn't mess with that stuff. The next evening, a desk clerk opened up. She spoke of spirits, a man on the 5th floor, a woman in white roaming multiple floors, and a rare woman in black on the 3rd. I asked the evening front desk gal about ghosts in the building, and she told me of a man on the 5th floor, a woman in black on the 3rd, and a woman in white that was seen anywhere between the 2 and the 14th, technically 13th due to skipping it. She handed me a printout of the lodge's history, its Masonic roots steeped in secrets. She told me about the building history in the Masonic Lodge and gave me a cool print out of the history of the building. I shared my story, her eyes widening. I then told her my story, and she was creeped out, but wanted more details about the woman in black because she wasn't seen much. She believed me a small comfort. She believed me though, and honestly that felt pretty great. The rest of our stay was uneasy. Dreams plagued us, sleep elusive until dawn. Over the rest of our stay though, we still had some rough dreams, and sleep only came to me after about 4 in the morning. The TV flickered on, unbidden its static a taunt. The TV also turned on by itself multiple times, which was very weird. I couldn't shake the feeling of being pulled as if the lodge itself had guided my steps. I still don't know really what happened that night, and I have no idea how I ended up on those floors and what was going on. But I cannot help but think that maybe I was possessed or something. The woman in black lingered in my mind, her presence a question without an answer. The hotel's history, its chapel theater, and hidden rituals felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. We left, but the lodge's grip followed its secrets etched into our memories, a haunting we couldn't escape. The echo in the house. The townhouse stood new and pristine, but its walls held a secret that no blueprint could reveal. At night, the air grew thick, as if the house itself was listening, waiting for its moment to speak. Anna, a college student, felt it a chill that wasn't from the open window, a presence that lingered just out of sight. Her roommates sensed it too, their laughter fading into uneasy glances as strange sounds filled the silence. And then one night, the house answered back, mimicking Anna's voice, her breath, her soul. So my roommates and I are young girls living alone in our college townhouse neighborhood. The house was built no later than maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and honestly, that's really pushing it. But lots of weird stuff has been happening. The house was modern, all clean lines and fresh paint, but something about it felt wrong. So we're all Christians. And I grew up Catholic, so we all very much believe in spirits and demons and all that, and the power of Christ to defeat them. Anna's faith was her anchor forged in Catholic school, strengthened by nightly prayers with her roommates Lily and Sarah. I had a dream maybe a couple of months ago of my dog growling at an evil presence, and I rebuked it in the dream in the name of Jesus and woke up. The dream had shaken her. Her dog Max's snarls echoing in her mind, but she'd dismissed it as nerves. The oddities began subtly. My coworker came over and said that she swore that she heard me banging around in the house in the back of the house when I wasn't home. Anna laughed it off, but the incidents piled up. I always hear my roommate banging around in her room and she's not even home. Lily swore she heard Sarah's laughter from the kitchen, only to find it empty. We will hear knocking on the walls, and I've heard my dog rustling around in his kennel when he's right next to me. Max would stare at corners, his hackles raised, growling at nothing. Or so Anna thought. And so I thought that maybe there's an animal somewhere, but the house had other plans. Last night, I was sitting on the couch doing some homework and watching some TV. I let out a low whistle, and I immediately hear it repeated back to me again, I all alone. The sound was sharp, identical coming from the hallway, and so I rewind the TV to see if it was just a really well-timed coincidence, and there was zero whistling. Anna's heart raced, her fingers trembling as she paused the show. So I called my sister who lives 3 houses down to come over, and she runs over and doesn't see anyone outside around the house or anything. Her sister Emily arrived, her face pale as she scanned the dark street, empty, silent. Anna grabbed a can of wasp spray, her makeshift weapon. Naturally, I go through the house with my industrial wasp spray can and check to make sure that there's nobody actually in the house. Every room was clear, the closets bare, the windows locked. I came back to where my sister is, and she says to me, "Don't whistle right now, I'm freaked out." But I can assure you that I didn't whistle at all. But she swore that she heard me whistle again. Emily's voice shook, her eyes darting to the ceiling. Anna froze. She hadn't whistled. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like a hand pressing on her chest. Lily returned home, her eyes wide as Anna recounted the night. My roommate finally comes home, but I tell her what happened. And eventually I leave, offering her to come with, but she says that she's fine and just wants to go to bed. Anna left for Emily's house, needing distance. Then she texts me in around maybe an hour or so and says, "Are you back home?" And I say no. And she tells me that she heard me talking this whole time, and I just said, "You," trying to get her attention so she heard me talking too. Lily's text was frantic, Anna's voice clear as day, calling her name from the living room. Obviously something is in this house. It wasn't human. The realization sank in, cold and sharp. The house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was alive, mimicking their voices, their habits. What did it want? Anna's faith surged, her rosary a lifeline. She gathered Lily and Sarah, their hands clasped in prayer, reciting Psalms 23 and 91. Their voices trembling but resolute. They anointed the doors with oil blessed in their church and placed crosses above every entrance. But the house fought back. That night, Max growled at the attic hatch, his eyes fixed on the sealed door. A faint whistle drifted down, slow and deliberate, echoing Anna's tune. They called their pastor a calm man, with a voice like gravel. He arrived with a Bible and holy water, his presence a bulwark against the unseen. "This isn't a demon," he said, "but a deceiver, a shadow that feeds on fear." He led them in prayer, commanding the entity to flee in Christ's name. The air shifted lighter, but not gone. The house was quiet, but it was watching. The pastor left them with instructions: pray daily, keep the crosses up, and never respond to the mimic. Days later, a discovery chilled them. The townhouse's foundation had been poured over an old well sealed decades ago after a child vanished inside. The locals whispered of a voice that lured people to the well, mimicking loved ones. Was it trapped in their home now? Anna found scratches inside the attic hatch, too precise for claws spelling a word stay. She didn't tell Lily or Sarah. They prayed harder, their faith a shield, but the house never felt clean. Now every sound is suspect. Anna keeps her Bible open, Max at her side, but the whistles linger, faint, taunting. The house knows their names, and it's waiting for them to answer. The woman at the gate. The night was heavy, the kind that presses against your chest, making every breath a conscious effort. I was a cop, used to the dark, the quiet, the calls that came when the world slept. But this call, it was different. The dispatcher's voice had trembled just for a second when she gave me the address. A death notification. Routine, I thought. I'd done dozens. Yet as my cruiser rolled down the empty rural road, the air felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. I saw her before I saw the gate. A figure pale and still standing just inside the property line. The headlights caught her eyes sharp, knowing like she'd been waiting for me. I slowed my hand resting on my radio. Instinct, prickling. She didn't move, didn't wave, just watched. I stepped out the gravel, crunching under my boots, and called out. Her voice soft but clear, carried across the distance. I heard you coming. My gut twisted. I hadn't used the siren. Ma'am. Do you live here? I asked, keeping my tone steady. She nodded, her face half-shadowed. I'll walk to the house, she said, gesturing toward a faint light about 75 yards away. I agreed, but something about her felt off, her movements too smooth, her presence too quiet. I followed my flashlight, cutting through the dark, but she stayed ahead, just out of reach. By the time I reached the house, she was gone. Vanished like she'd never been there. The front door creaked open before I could knock. A younger woman stood there, her eyes wide with worry. Officer, is everything okay? She asked, her voice tight. I glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see the woman from the gate. Nothing. I asked to speak with her and any adults inside. She invited me in, but when I mentioned waiting for the woman I'd met, her face paled. There's no one else here, she said. My heart thudded. I'd seen her. I'd spoken to her. I searched the property, my flashlight sweeping the driveway, the trees, the gate. Nothing. No footprints. No trace. Back inside, I delivered the news about Susan, their mother killed in a car accident miles away. The daughter's sobs filled the room, her husband holding her close. And then I saw it, a photo on the wall. A middle-aged woman. Familiar, Buddha familiar. The daughter noticed my stare. That's Mom, she whispered. My blood ran cold. It was her, the woman at the gate. I've been a cop for years, seen things that haunt you. But that night shook me. The call came late, a fatal crash on a lonely stretch of highway. Susan, a widow, who'd moved in with her daughter after her husband's death, was gone. I drove to their home, a small house tucked in the countryside, the kind of place where the stars feel closer than the nearest neighbor. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway, just inside the property gate. She said she'd heard me coming from miles away. Her voice was calm. Almost too calm, like she knew why I was there. I asked if she lived at the residence. She confirmed she did, but her eyes, there was something about them like they saw through me. I asked her to speak with me at the house. She agreed, but said she needed to walk as the house was about 2 yards from the road. I nodded, but as we moved, I noticed the silence. No crickets, no wind, just her soft steps and my own heartbeat. I kept my distance, my hand near my holster, not sure why. When I reached the house, I climbed the steps to a small wooden porch. I began scanning the driveway for the woman. She wasn't there. I turned, expecting her to appear from the shadows. Nothing. The door opened, and a younger woman greeted me, her face etched with concern. I explained my purpose, but when I mentioned the woman at the gate, she froze. "We live alone," she said. "Just me, my husband," and her voice trailed off. I freaked out a bit and began searching the property, but there was nothing. The air grew heavier as I stepped inside. I told her and her husband the news about Susan, who was her mother. The room seemed to shrink as the daughter's grief poured out her husband's arms, steadying her trembling frame. Susan had been struggling, they said, ever since her husband passed. She'd moved in to find some peace, but the weight of loss clung to her. As they spoke, my eyes wandered to the walls lined with family photos. One caught me, a woman middle-aged with sharp eyes and a faint smile. My pulse quickened. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman that stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman I spoke with near the gate. I couldn't look away. The daughter followed my gaze. "That was actually her mother, the woman that had passed in that wreck," she said, her voice breaking. I nodded, but my mind was spiraling. Had I seen her? Spoken to her? The woman at the gate had been real, her voice, her presence, her words. But Susan was dead, her body miles away, mangled in the wreckage. I forced myself to focus, to finish the paperwork, to offer condolences. But every step back to my cruiser felt like wading through fog. I really had no way to explain this. Did I really speak with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash, just before telling her family about what happened? The drive back to the station was a blur. The road stretched endlessly, the darkness thicker than before. I kept replaying the encounter, the woman's voice, her eyes, the way she vanished. Back at the precinct, I pulled the crash report. Susan's time of death was hours before I'd arrived at the house. Hours. My hands shook as I typed my report, leaving out the part about the gate. No one would believe me. I barely believed myself. Days later, I drove back to the house off duty, hoping for answers. The gate was locked, the driveway empty. I stood there staring at the spot where she'd been. A chill ran through me, not from the wind, but from something deeper. I'd heard stories from other cops, whispers of things seen on night shifts, things that didn't add up. But this was mine. Susan, or whatever she was, had chosen me to deliver her final goodbye, to linger in the space between worlds. The daughter's words echoed in my mind. Susan hadn't been herself since her husband's death. Maybe she hadn't been ready to leave. Maybe she'd stayed tethered to the home she'd sought refuge in. I thought of the photo, her face frozen in time, and wondered if she was still out there, waiting at the gate for someone else to hear her. The countryside was quiet now, but I knew better. Some things don't rest, not even in death. Weeks passed, but the memory clung like damp air. I started noticing things on other calls, shadows that moved too fast, voices that didn't belong. Was it her? Or had she opened a door, letting me see what I'd ignored before? Every creak of my cruiser, every flicker in the dark, felt like a question I couldn't answer. I never told the daughter. How could I? I met your mother before I broke the news she was already gone. No. Some truths are too heavy. But I carry it, that night, that gate, that woman who shouldn't have been there. And sometimes when the radio's silent and the road's empty, I swear I hear her voice again, soft and clear, saying she heard me coming. The starlit figure. The room felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself had thickened. I sat cross-legged on my bed, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, letting the world fade. The hum of my thoughts usually quieted during meditation, but tonight a strange unease crept in, sharp and uninvited. Was it the flicker of the dim lamp? Or had something shifted in the space around me? My skin prickled a warning I couldn't ignore. The silence wasn't silent. A low hum, almost imperceptible, pulsed beneath the stillness like a heartbeat in the walls. I tried to focus to push the feeling away, but it grew, clawing at my chest. Something was watching, waiting, its presence curling around me like smoke. I opened my eyes, heart thudding, and scanned the familiar corners of my room. Occupant posters. The usual clutter. Nothing was out of place, yet everything felt wrong. Then I saw the painting. It hung on the wall, a print of swirling stars and midnight blues, one I'd stared at 1,000 times. But now it was different. I noticed a painting on my wall, which I had for quite a while. At this stage, it was the Star Night painting, and as I scanned over to it, something about it was just wrong. The stars glowed not with reflected light, but with a life of their own pulsing faintly in the dimness. I blinked, certain it was a trick of my tired eyes, but the glow only intensified. The light was alive. One star high in the left corner burned brighter than the rest, its radiance growing with each passing second. It looked as if all the stars were actually glowing. The longer that I looked, the more bright a certain star got as well. It was one of the stars in the top left corner, just to the right of the trees. I leaned forward, breath shallow, unable to look away. Was this real? Or had my mind conjured something from the shadows of my own curiosity? The star's light seemed to hum, a soundless vibration that filled the room. I had to know. My legs moved before my mind caught up, pulling me off the bed toward the painting. I was so sure that I was dreaming, or hallucinating or something, that I had gotten up off the bed and started to make my way toward the painting. But as I approached, the star would fade, not as if someone was dimming the lights, though it was as if a fog was setting over this star. The glow dimmed, swallowed by a creeping haze, and the star vanished, leaving a void in its place. My heart raced. This wasn't right, wasn't possible. The void wasn't empty. As I got even closer, the fog practically snuffed out the star, and in its place it was dark. I stood frozen, staring at the blackened patch where the star had been. Slowly, something emerged from the darkness, a faint outline, then a shape growing clearer with every heartbeat. Something started to appear out of the dark noise. At first, I thought it was the star coming back into my vision. But as it became more clear, I saw it for what it really was. A face, a whole figure, actually big enough to cover a large portion of the painting. It wasn't paint, wasn't art. It was alive, watching me with eyes I couldn't see, but felt. I remember my fight or flight kicking in when realizing what I was actually looking at. My body screamed to run, but my feet stayed rooted, caught in a trance. I distinctly remember thinking that the feeling of that experience went from curious to bad. Still, I stayed in place and waited to see what else would happen, like I was in some kind of trance. The figure's presence was heavy, its gaze piercing as if it knew me, saw through me. I wanted to scream, to move, but the room held me, the air thick with its will. Once the figure was fully visible, I felt like it saw me. We were looking at each other eye to eye, sold to whatever it was. We stood there, locked in a silent exchange, the world reduced to this moment. We sat there for 20 seconds or so with nothing happening. And I was about to be done with this and run out of the room, but then it did something. The figure moved its hand, extending slowly, not threatening, but deliberate, as if offering something unseen. It started to reach out its hand, not in a threatening way, almost as if it was offering something. Its fingers seemed to breach the canvas, curling into my reality, and my blood ran cold. I broke free. I ran to my light switch and flicked on my bright overhead light. I had a dim lamp on for meditation, and looked at the painting, and suddenly, it was totally normal. The figure was gone. The stars just paint the canvas lifeless. I stood there, panting, searching for any trace of what I'd seen. Had it been real, or had I lost myself in my own mind? The room was silent, but the weight of that gaze lingered heavy on my skin. As I was coming back from my trance, I realized my face was wet with tears, something that I hadn't noticed before the light was on. I touched my cheek, startled by the dampness, my hands trembling. I then go to my phone to text whoever telling someone about this, but I stopped before even unlocking it. Almost 30 minutes had passed since I had paused that timer, and that felt like an impossibly long time. The minutes didn't add up. There was absolutely no way that I spent 30 minutes staring at a painting, so then it felt like maybe 3 to 4 minutes of watching tops. Time had slipped stolen, and I hadn't even noticed. Panic took over. I freaked out and ran into my mother's room, needing somebody else's presence. I just couldn't stand being alone anymore. I spilled the story, words tumbling out, my voice shaking as I described the star, the figure, the hand. She heard my whole story and was 100% convinced that I had just had a run-in with a demonic presence. She spoke of spiritual battles of darkness, cloaking holy light, her faith weaving meaning into the chaos. I didn't know what to believe, but her certainty grounded me. Her presence, a shield against the unknown. She then got my dad to go in and bless the room, leaving a Saint Benedict medal in my room to hopefully ward off anything negative. He moved with purpose, his voice steady as he prayed, placing the medal on my desk. He then took the painting off the wall and took it outside, and that was the last time that I ever saw it. The room felt lighter after, but not entirely clean. I kept expecting the figure to return, to peer from another corner, another shadow. The medal became my anchor. I kind of feel off at times in here, I guess like I'm being watched. But having the medal and several crucifixes does help ease my feeling. I stopped meditating, stopped dabbling in the occult. The allure of those practices soured by fear. But the room never felt fully mine again. I'd catch myself glancing at the wall where the painting had hung, half expecting to see that star ignite, that figure emerge. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to look away. I started researching, digging into stories of visions of entities tied to objects. Some spoke of spirits, others of psychological breaks, but none matched the clarity of what I'd seen. My parents' faith offered one explanation, but my skepticism pushed back, searching for logic in the impossible. Had my experiments opened a door, or had my mind crafted a nightmare from stress and solitude? The questions lingered unanswered as I rebuilt my routines, avoiding the quiet moments that invited doubt. The experience changed me. I used to chase the unknown, craving proof of something beyond. Now I shied away from it, wary of what might answer if I called. My room. My sanctuary became a place of caution, its corners hiding secrets I couldn't trust. I leaned on my family, their rituals, their certainty, even if I didn't fully share it. The medal, the crucifixes, they were talismans not just of faith, but of survival. I started talking to others, sharing fragments of the story, hoping for clarity. Some saw it as a warning, others as imagination run wild. A friend suggested the painting itself might have been a conduit, carrying a history I'd never know. I wondered about its origins, who had owned it, what it had seen. But with it gone, those answers were lost, leaving only the memory of that hand, that gaze. Life moved on, but the shadow of that night didn't. I'd wake sometimes, heart racing, certain I'd heard a whisper, felt a presence. I kept the lights on longer, checked the locks, avoided mirrors in the dark. The figure hadn't returned, but its mark was permanent, a reminder that some doors once opened never fully close. I carried that weight quietly, a secret I guarded even from myself. I found solace in routine school friends, the hum of daily life. But the unknown was always there, a flicker at the edge of my vision. I stopped seeking it out, stopped asking questions. I wasn't ready to answer. The painting was gone, the figure with it. But the room remembered, and so did I. My faith or lack of it didn't matter. The experience was real, and it was mine. Years later, I'm different. I've left the occult behind, not out of fear, but out of respect for what I can't control. I'm still skeptical, still searching, but I'm careful now, aware of the cost of curiosity. My room is just a room, but I don't linger in it alone. The metal stays the crucifixes too, not because I believe, but because they remind me I survived. I've shared this story sparingly, each telling a step toward letting go. But the figure's eyes, its hand, they're etched in me a puzzle I'll never solve. I've read about visions, about trances, about the mind's power to deceive. Maybe that's all. It was a trick, a dream. But the tears, the time, the terror, they were real, and they changed me. I'm preparing for new chapters, new places, new risks. But I carry this with me, a lesson in the fragility of safety. The world is bigger, stranger than I once thought, and I'm not sure I want to know its secrets anymore. Some things are better left unseen, untouched, unknown. I live lighter now, but I check the shadows just in case. The room is quiet these days. The metal's still on my desk, but sometimes in the silence I feel it. A gaze, a presence, faint, but there. I don't look for it, don't invite it, but I know it's watching. And I wonder, as I always will, what it wanted, what it offered, and what might have happened if I'd taken its hand. The Unseen Visitor, the two-story house in the Philippines, was a patchwork of memories, its creaking floors holding the weight of our family's life. My family, my parents and two younger siblings, lived with our grandmother in a two-story house. Our family lives on the ground floor, whereas my grandmother, she has the second floor to herself. I was 9, my siblings younger, our world small and safe. My parents have a separate room, while my siblings and I share the same room in separate beds. Our room was a haven, beds pushed close, filled with the hum of childhood. Our bedroom and our parents' bedroom was connected by a sort of shared bathroom. Grandma's footsteps were familiar, her nightly visits, a quiet comfort. But one night, the house felt different, its warmth replaced by a chill that settled deep. We were alone, our parents delayed. One night, our parents took an unusually long time to come home. To fill the hours, we turned to our favorite escape. So to pass the time, my siblings and I just watched Beauty and the Beast in one of those VHS tapes, since it was our favorite Disney movie back then. The familiar songs played, but the air grew heavy. We were watching the movie for some time when suddenly the door to our room just sort of spontaneously opened. The hinges groaned unprompted, and my breath caught. And a few seconds later, the door to our toilet opened and closed. And we heard the flushing sound of the toilet. The sound was sharp, impossible. Something was moving unseen in our space. The sequence repeated, deliberate. This was followed by the opening of the toilet door and the opening of our bedroom door. My sister Lings whimpered, her small hand clutching mine. I remember my sibling Lings and I being in a sort of state of shock, and we huddled together on the corner of the bed, just sort of crying. We pressed into the corner, tears blurring our vision. I also distinctly remember that the television turned to static. The screen hissed its static, a mocking chorus. My siblings and I were freaked out the entire time. We were just kids, but we knew this wasn't right. The house, once our sanctuary, had turned against us. Fear held us until our parents returned. Their footsteps were a lifeline, but our sobs confused them. Eventually, our parents arrived and saw us crying, but they really didn't think anything of it. They soothed us, assuming it was just childish fright. The next day, my mother took me to the bathroom, and she told me that my grandmother had actually passed away. Her words hit like a stone, heavy with truth. I was certain that I did not tell them about the events that happened the previous night. I hadn't spoken yet, the timing was too precise. Grandma was gone, and the house had known before we did. I buried the memory, calling it a trick of youth. As a skeptic, I built walls of logic, dismissing the paranormal as fiction. I conveniently thought of that event as a false memory, since I never really got any confirmation from external sources that whatever happened was actually real. Years later, I was far from that house, pursuing a PhD in the UK. A family visit brought us together, the car filled with laughter and nostalgia. The entire family was in the car, and we were talking about grandmother's last birthday celebration. We recalled her smile, her part Chinese traditions, the joy of her milestone birthday. We were part Chinese, and she may have been like 70 years old for that birthday, so it was a special celebration, and thus, memorable. The memories warmed us. But then my mother's voice shifted. But then my mother suddenly mentioned, "Do you remember about the day that she died? And you were crying? Even though you didn't know that your grandmother was dead?" My heart stopped. She then went into some detail about the events that my siblings and I experienced that night. Apparently, my younger sister had told my mother about that night. When it was her turn to be told about my grandmother's passing, her words unraveled decades of doubt. And that confirmed everything for me, and really freaked me the heck out. My sister had spoken a secret shared I never knew. The doors, the toilet, the static. They were real, not a child's fantasy. My skepticism, my shield, cracked. What had moved through our room that night? Grandma's presence, or something else? The house, with its shared spaces and memories, held more than I'd allowed myself to believe. I sat in silence, the car's hum a distant echo. My siblings, now grown, avoided my gaze, the memory a wound we'd never touched. The rational world I'd built felt fragile, pierced by a truth I couldn't explain. A visitor who'd left a mark that time couldn't erase. The taxi to nowhere. The city was a maze of neon and noise, but its quiet corners hid dangers that waited for the weary. Emma, exhausted after a late bar shift, stepped into the night, her boots echoing on the empty pavement. The dark street stretched ahead at its shadows, swallowing the light, whispering threats she couldn't see. She was alone, or so she thought, until a taxi's headlights cut through the gloom, offering safety, or something far worse. In that moment, her choice would pull her into a nightmare she'd never forget. I was working in a bar, so I got off work pretty late. The bar was a whirlwind of clinking glasses and slurred laughter, and by the end of her shift, Emma's legs ached, her mind fogged with fatigue. Since I lived quite close to the bar, I would always walk home after my shift, and there were two different routes that I would take. One path wound through the city's pulsing heart, alive with drunken crowds and neon signs. One was along the street where most of the city's bars and the clubs were, and it was usually really crowded. The other was a silent, shadowed alley, its streetlights dim and sparse. Since I was pretty exhausted, and I didn't want to see any more people that night, I took the other route, which was much quieter, but also much darker, and I never felt very safe there. The quiet route was a gamble, but Emma craved solitude. As I was walking, a group of drunk guys approached me, blocking my way. Their voices were loud, their eyes glassy, leering as they closed in. I made it clear that I had no interest in talking to them, so they eventually let me pass. Her sharp tone cut through their haze, and they stumbled aside, muttering. A nearby taxi driver must have seen what was going on because he rolled down his window and asked if I needed a ride home. The driver's face was kind, older, his voice gentle. I declined, saying that I didn't have to go too far, but he insisted, saying that he wouldn't even charge me. Emma hesitated, her instincts warring. I thought that maybe he was looking out for me since he had seen the incident with the drunk eyes, so I made a really stupid decision to accept this offer. She slid into the back seat, the leather cold against her skin. After I got in, he asked for my address and we started driving. She gave her street name a few blocks away, and the car purred forward. I even offered to pay him, but he refused. His smile was disarming, but something in his eyes, too sharp, too focused, made her stomach twist. The city blurred past familiar landmarks flashing by. Shortly after we arrived near my home, but instead of stopping, he just sort of drove past it. Emma's breath caught as her apartment building receded. I asked where he was going, and he acted like it was an accident, saying that he was just looking for a place to turn around. His voice was calm, too. Calm, but the car didn't slow. But he kept driving for a few more minutes, until we ended up in an industrial area where he pulled into a dead end. Warehouses loomed, their windows dark, the street silent save for the engine's hum. At this point, I was terrified, but honestly, I didn't know what to do. Her phone was dead useless in her pocket. Especially since my phone had died earlier, I just sort of sat there. Fear rooted her to the seat, her mind racing for an escape. He hadn't locked the doors. Could she run? The driver's hands rested on the wheel, his silence deafening. Was he waiting for her to scream, to beg? Emma's pulse thumped in her ears, but she forced her voice to steady, and eventually said, "Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to turn around." The words were bold, a challenge cutting through the tension. He turned his eyes, meeting hers in the rearview mirror. He looked at me, and I think he got scared to follow through with whatever he had planned. His gaze faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. After a moment, he simply said that I was right, turned the car around, and drove me back to my place. The car lurched, tires crunching as he navigated back to her street. My heart was pounding as I got out of that car, but I was really grateful that nothing terrible had happened. Emma stumbled onto the sidewalk, her legs shaking as the taxi's taillights vanished. But the fear didn't leave her. She locked her door, checked the windows, her hands trembling as she clutched a kitchen knife. What had he wanted? The kindness in his voice had been a mask, hiding something dark. She didn't sleep that night. The memory of the dead-end street replaying the silence of the industrial area, a scream in her mind. Had he done this before? Would he try again? Emma stopped walking home, taking cabs with trusted companies. But the unease lingered, a shadow that followed her. Weeks later, a coworker mentioned a rumor women in the city had reported a taxi driver offering free rides, only to take them to remote areas. None had been harmed, but all felt the same terror Emma had. The police had no leads, the driver a ghost in the city's sprawl. Was it him? Emma checked her locks obsessively, her apartment no longer a sanctuary. One night, she swore she saw a taxi idling outside, its driver obscured watching. She called a friend to stay over, the car gone by morning, but the dread remained. Now Emma trusts no one. The city's lights, once comforting, hide predators in plain sight. She keeps a charged phone, a can of mace, and a prayer that luck won't run out. The taxi to nowhere was a warning, and she'd never ignore her instincts again. But in the quiet, she wonders if he's still out there waiting for the next passenger. The house that never forgot. Some houses don't let you forget. At 7, I was just a kid, fearless and foolish, chasing thrills with my friends in a sleepy town where nothing ever happened. But that summer, we found a place that changed everything. A crumbling house on the edge of our path to school. Its windows were dark, its yard a jungle of weeds, and its silence screamed of secrets. We thought we were invincible, but the moment we stepped inside, the air turned sharp, like it was watching us. It was a dare, nothing's more. My friend Tommy and I, armed with rocks and stupid grins, decided to leave our mark. We shattered a sliding glass door, the crash echoing like a warning. Peering inside, the chill hit us not just cold, but wrong, like the house was alive and angry. The shadows seemed to move, and the air felt thick, pressing against our skin. We ran, hearts pounding, swearing we'd never go back. Months later, my world tilted. My parents announced we were moving, and when our truck pulled up to the new house, my stomach dropped. It was that house, the one we'd broken into. The broken glass was gone, patched up, but the feeling lingered heavy and unyielding. I waited for my parents to mention the vandalism to ground me for life, but they acted like it was just another house. I knew better. Something was waiting for me. The first night I lay in my new bed, the darkness thicker than it should have been. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comforts. It was the kind that listens. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block it out, but then it happened. A force, sudden and sharp, slammed into my face like a fist from nowhere. I tore the covers off, my breath ragged, but the room was empty. The house knew I was here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a kid's imagination running wild. But the house didn't stop. Every creak, every shadow felt personal, like it was sizing me up. I started avoiding the basement where the kitchen sat, unnatural and out of place. There was a hallway down there, long and L-shaped, leading to nothing but a blank wall. I hated it. It felt like a trap, like the house was daring me to walk it. When I was 7, my family moved into a haunted house. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect ghosts to linger, just a rundown relic on a forgotten street. Its yard choked with weeds, and its driveway cracked like old bones. There was an abandoned house that my friends and I would pass on our walk to school. It was in need of a lot of work, the grass overgrown like a hayfield, and the driveway all tore up. Tommy and I thought we were tough, sneaking in one summer day to prove it. We thought it would be a good idea to smash some of the windows out. We broke a sliding glass door and poked our heads in, and it immediately gave us chills. The cold inside wasn't normal, not for July. It was sharp, bitter, like the house was punishing us. It was super eerie and oddly cold for a summer day in there. We dipped out, and we never went back. When my parents said we were moving, I didn't think much of it until we pulled up. My heart instantly sank because it was that same house. I braced for a lecture about the broken glass, but they didn't know. It was just a cruel twist of fate. We ended up moving in, and my stepdad fixed the place up a bit. He patched the windows, mowed the lawn, but the house didn't care. It was still eerily cold inside, and I remember the layout being very strange. The kitchen, for instance, that was in the basement, and there was a long L-shaped hallway that went behind the kitchen and really led to nowhere. The strangeness started small, but grew. One morning I was laying in bed awake, but with the covers over my head, and I felt something that I can only describe as a fist being dropped onto my face. I ripped the covers down off of my head immediately to see who it was, but nobody was there. I told myself it was a dream, but deep down I knew. The house was angry and I was the target. Maybe it remembered the rocks, the shattered glass, my careless laughter. It didn't stop there. The basement became my nightmare. I was walking down the stairs to the basement one day when I felt a shove in the middle of my back. It pushed me off the last 2 steps. I spun around expecting Tommy or my stepdad playing a prank, but the stairs were empty. It happened again, exact same staircase, exact same steps. Something pushed me for a second time off of the last 2 steps. My heart raced, but I kept quiet. Who would believe a kid I barely believed myself? The house wasn't just after me. My stepdad tells us that he had something freaky happen to him. He said he was doing the tile in the bathroom and said that he saw a face in the tiles looking back at him, but it wasn't his reflection. It was a completely different face. He laughed it off, but his eyes were uneasy. My mom started noticing things too. Doors closing on their own footsteps in the hallway at night. The L-shaped corridor in the basement became a place we all avoided. I'd catch my stepdad staring at it sometimes, like he was waiting for something to step out. We didn't stay long. We ended up moving out of there. The house let us go, but it never left me. Years later, I told my wife about it, half expecting her to laugh. She didn't. She wanted to see it. We drove to it, and it was exactly as it was. Almost 30 years ago, abandoned, the grass overgrown, and no renovations done on it at all. The windows were boarded now, the driveway worse than before. Standing there, I felt it again, that cold, that weight, like the house was still watching. Recently, I drove by again. It looks like somebody might be living there. A car in the driveway, curtains in the windows. It was different, but not better. I wanted to knock to ask if they'd felt it too, but the thought of stepping onto that porch stopped me cold. I would genuinely love to talk to them, to see if they experienced anything. But I also really don't want to freak them out. What if they hadn't noticed? What if they had, and saying it out loud made it worse? The house never forgot me, and I never forgot it. Every time I close my eyes, I see that hallway, that blank wall at the end, waiting. I hear the silence, feel the shove on the stairs. I wonder if it's still there, biding its time, or if it's found someone new to haunt. Sometimes I dream I'm back in that bed covers over my head, waiting for the fist to fall. I've lived a lot of places since, but none like that. Houses have memories, and this one held a grudge. I tell myself it's over, that I was just a kid who made a mistake. But deep down, I know better. That house is still out there, and it's not done. Not with me. Not with anyone who dares to call it home. The Skull's Curse. The house never felt right, not from the moment we moved in. Its walls creaked under the weight of something unspoken. Something older than the fresh paint and new carpets. I was too young to name it, but I felt it, a chill that lingered in the air, a whisper in the quiet. Was it the house itself? Or had we brought something with us? Something that refused to stay buried? The answer lay in the basement, hidden among forgotten boxes. The gift changed everything. My father, always chasing the thrill of the strange, came home with a story and a relic. While working here, he said that a very suspicious old man would come in, often wearing bones on his necklace. The man's tales of real bones fascinated him, and in a reckless jest, my dad, messing with the old man, because he didn't believe him, told him that he wanted a human skull. Weeks later, one day, that man came in and actually gave my dad a skull. Its empty socket stared up from his hands, and I wondered what price we'd pay for his curiosity. It wasn't just a trophy. My dad was very surprised, obviously, but assumed it wasn't real, and so he took it home. My mother, her instincts sharper than his, sensed danger. My mom, who is very superstitious, was really mad at my dad and told him to get rid of it. But my dad decided to put it into the basement and forgot about it. The skull vanished into the clutter below, and with it, the house's warmth faded, replaced by a shadow that clung to every room. The shadows had eyes. At night, the house came alive, its pulse a rhythm of unease. My aunt told me that she saw my brother, who was probably a toddler around this time, being held by a little girl out of the corner of her eye. The vision flickered, gone before she could speak. My mom also claims to have seen this little girl hanging around me and my brother's rooms when we were toddlers. I'd wake sometimes, certain I wasn't alone, the air thick with a presence I couldn't name. Sleep became a battleground. My mother soon began to have horrific dreams and would see people standing by her bed. Her screams pierced the night she woke up on multiple occasions screaming bloody murder and claiming that there were men in her closet. Stranger still, weirdly too, sometimes she wouldn't even remember these fits. I'd lie in bed, heart pounding, listening to the house groan, wondering what watched us from the dark. The basement was the heart of it all. I started to have extreme night terrors as well. I would also sleepwalk. One night my mom woke up in another scared frenzy that she would've. She quickly went to my room to see that I wasn't there. She found me downstairs, sitting crisscross applesauce in front of the TV that wasn't even on. When she asked what I was doing, I told her that I was watching my show and that I wanted to hang out with my friends outside. I don't remember those words, but they haunted me, a sign that something else was speaking through me. The house spoke too. You could hear people walking up and down the stairs, even when you were home alone. The steps were heavy, deliberate, echoing in the silence. There was often knocking on my walls as well. I'd press my ear to the plaster waiting for a pattern, a message, but it was just noise, relentless and sourceless. The walls seemed to hold secrets, and I wondered if the skull was their keeper, whispering to us from below. My brother, braver or more foolish, pushed further. My brother played with a Ouija board and claimed as my mom standing up straight in bed, with her eyes staring forward. When he spoke, she simply got back into bed and just went back to sleep. The image chilled me, her body. A puppet moved by something we couldn't see. I stopped going near the basement door. Its darkness, a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The house grew hungrier. Every night it tightened its grip, its presence a weight on our chests. I started sleeping with the lights on, the glow, a frail defense against the shadows. What was the skull, and why had it chosen us? I overheard my parents arguing, my mother's voice sharp with fear, my father's stubborn with denial. They didn't know what I knew, that the house was alive and it wasn't ours anymore. We tried to fight back. My mother burned sage, hung crosses, prayed until her voice cracked. But the air stayed heavy, the shadows unmoved. I'd catch glimpses of movement, a flicker in the hallway, a shape in the mirror. Was it the little girl, the men, or something else entirely? The house didn't answer, but its silence was loud, a challenge to our fragile courage. The breaking point came when my parents' marriage frayed. After my parents got divorced, my mom decided to move out of this house. We couldn't stay, not with the weight of the house pressing down. The basement was very busy and cluttered, so we called someone with a big garbage truck to help us empty it out. We tore through boxes, shelves, old furniture, searching for normalcy. When my dad moved out, he didn't go looking for the skull because he had forgotten where he'd put it down there. But I looked driven by a need to face it, to end it. After cleaning up the whole basement, going through everything, we never found that skull. It was gone, as if it had never been, leaving only questions. Had it dissolved into the house, its curse complete? The absence was worse than finding it, a void that mocked our efforts. The house seemed to laugh, its walls humming with a secret we'd never know. The final day was the worst. The last time that I was in that house before leaving, I truly felt terrified as well, like something was telling me to get out and leave. The air was thick, oppressive, urging me toward the door. I ended up running out of that house in the end. I didn't look back, didn't dare, but I felt it watching, its gaze, a cold hand on my neck. We left, and the house let us go. Now my mom and I sleep just fine, and I have not experienced anything else like this, paranormal or whatever, otherwise since we moved out of that place. Our new home was quiet, its walls empty of whispers, its nights free of terror. but I carried the house with me. Its memory, a scar that ached in the dark. I'd wake sometimes, certain I'd heard footsteps, felt that gaze again. I started digging, asking questions. Who was the old man? And where had the skull come from? The music store was long gone. The man a ghost in my father's stories. I wondered about the house's first owners, the woman whose father built it. There was no creepy history in that house as well. Mind you, we actually knew the woman whose father built the house, and other than this woman's family, we were the only other people to live there. Yet something had taken root. Something tied to that skull. So that gift. I shared the story with friends, with strangers, hoping to make sense of it. Some saw it as a haunting, others as a family under stress, imaginations run wild. I didn't know what to believe, only that it was real to us. The little girl, the men, the footsteps, they were ours. Our burden, our truth. I stopped looking for answers, accepting the mystery as part of me. The house is someone else's now. I wonder if they feel it, if the skull is still there, hidden, waiting. I drive past, sometimes slowing to stare at its windows, searching for a sign. The house looks ordinary, but I know better. Its heart beats in the basement. Its eyes watch from the walls. I don't go inside, don't need to. Its curse is gone, but its shadow remains a reminder of what we brought home. The faceless shadow. The town was cloaked in frost, its streets silent under a sky heavy with clouds. I saw Allie as a sister because I grew up with 5 brothers and no sisters, so I wanted her to be my sister so bad. At 12, I clung to Allie, the 14-year-old daughter of my dad's girlfriend, like she was family. And on this particular night, Allie and Evan had invited me to join them at a youth group event across town. Her boyfriend Evan, also 14, led the way, their excitement pulling me along. I was reluctant because it was for high schoolers only, and I was in the 7th grade, but they eventually convinced me, and so we went. I hesitated, feeling out of place, but their insistence won me over. The cold bit at our faces as we trekked across town, the promise of warmth driving us forward. Something in the air felt wrong. A tension I couldn't name. The journey was grueling, the chill seeping into our bones. We walked across town in the freezing cold, and after about 20 minutes, we made it to the right building. The building loomed ahead, a single-story structure, its purpose unclear. I don't remember if the building was actually a church, but it was a 1-story building. Its dark silhouette stood stark against the night. There were doors on both ends that were connected by a hallway. So if you looked in the glass on one door, you could see down to the other door, is what I'm getting at. A lone light flickered in the hallway, casting jagged shadows. When we got to the building, nobody was there, and the only light on was a singular light in the hallway. Disappointment hit hard. Evan had mixed up the event details. We'd braved the cold for nothing. Frustration turned to unease. We were annoyed that Evan had gotten the date wrong, and we walked in the cold for no reason, and so we decided to rest at the building for a few before making the walk back home. We lingered, reluctant to face the trek back. As we approached the building, I remember Ali looking into the window on the first floor. I remember watching her jaw drop as she looked into it. Allie's face froze, her breath clouding the glass. Next, Evan looked in and started describing what he was seeing, a tall figure in the hallway. His voice trembled, detailing something impossible. My heart dropped, but I honestly thought that they were just messing with me. I scoffed, certain it was a prank to scare the younger kid. But then I looked, and I saw it too. The hallway was a tunnel of dim light, and there it stood. As I looked in the window, I see a tall figure in the hallway, but it looks like it's crouched down. Its form was wrong, hunched, as if folding itself into the space. It has insanely long arms and legs, and when I look in its general direction, in the process of standing up immediately, I can tell that it is as tall as the ceiling is. It unfolded limbs stretching to brush the ceiling, unnatural and fluid. It was wearing a suit or something and had extremely pale skin, but no face. No eyes, no mouth, just a blank expanse where a face should be. And as it's standing up, it's waving its arms around like crazy. Its movements were frantic, almost mechanical yet purposeful. My stomach twisted. This wasn't human. The figure looked eerily similar to the Slender Man, but I know that that's just a creepy pasta, really. I'd heard of internet myths, but this was real solid in front of me. I tore my eyes away, heart hammering. I don't know how else to describe what was standing in front of me, but immediately, I take my eyes off of the window. Allie and Evan were pale, their breaths shallow. But because we were dumb kids, we decided to take a walk around the building before we left. Stupidity overrode fear, and we circled the building, feet crunching on frozen ground. I tried to avoid looking through the windows, but there was a sort of tapping noise that I heard as we made our way around it. A faint rhythmic sound followed us, unnatural in the silence. I'm not sure that that was anything paranormal, but it was weird, and so I thought that I should add it. It gnawed at me, a detail I couldn't shake. The building felt alive, its windows like eyes watching our every step. We hurried away, the cold, no longer our worst enemy. Years later, the memory lingered, a puzzle I couldn't solve. I'd pushed it down, convincing myself it was a childish fright. One final note too is that I talked to Ali years after it happened, and I'm like 99.9% sure that it wasn't something that they had planned just to scare me. Allie's voice was steady when we spoke, her recollection mirroring mine. I think that we all genuinely saw this thing, and I'm just so curious to know what it was and what any of this means. She hadn't laughed it off, hadn't called it a prank. What was that figure towering and faceless? So if there is somebody out there who knows what this is, or can give me any sort of information about it, then I would really love to hear your thoughts. The town, the building, the night, they were etched in me, a mystery that refused to fade. I was no expert, my knowledge of the paranormal thin. But that figure wasn't a story. It was real, and its presence haunted me, still a shadow I couldn't outrun. The shadow that crossed. The house was old, its walls steeped in secrets that whispered in the quiet of the night. Jake and his girlfriend, Mia, young and carefree, thought they'd found a haven, but something else called it home. In the flicker of the TV's glow, the air grew heavy, charged with an unseen presence that watched from the dark. Their dogs sensed it first. Their whimpers, a warning of what was coming, something that didn't belong. And then it moved, a shadow that defied the light, gliding through walls, hungry for their fear. My wife, or girlfriend at the time, and I were living in this house as young Anals, 19 years old. The house was a rental, a temporary nest for Jake and Mia, borrowed from Mia's aunt. I was smoking a bit, and not even good weed too, but just some mid stuff. And we were watching something on TV. The living room was cozy, the TV mounted on the wall, casting a soft glow. My wife wasn't smoking. Mia sipped a soda, her eyes fixed on the screen. The TV is hanging on the wall, and to the left of the TV is the hallway. The left side of the hallway is the bathroom. The right side is the spare bedroom, and the straight back was our bedroom. Jake took a drag, the haze settling in his mind when something caught his eye. While watching TV, I noticed a black, shadowy figure glide through the bathroom door, glides across the hall, and goes into the spare bedroom. It was no trick of the light, a solid, inky form about 5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, moving with eerie grace. Obviously, it didn't open any door, just sort of went through them. The figure vanished into the spare bedroom, leaving the air colder, heavier. The figure was roughly about 5 feet tall, I would say, and very broad-shouldered. So I see the figure appear and disappear. I instantly thought that my weed was laced or something. Jake's heart raced, his eyes darting to the joint in his hand. I started looking at my plant, even though I felt fine, and I really didn't say anything about it. I thought that I was just seeing things. So I started laughing a bit. A nervous chuckle escaped him, the absurdity of it all sinking in. While this happens though, our dogs were laying at my feet until the figure appeared, and they were suddenly terrified and got on the couch with us. Their two dogs, Rusty and Bella, whimpered, scrambling onto the couch, their eyes fixed on the hallway. Mia turned her brow furrowed. My wife asks, "Why are you laughing?" And I replied with, "Oh, I thought that I saw something." And she immediately replied with, "Did it come out of the bathroom?" Jake froze, his laughter dying. That's when we talk about what we had seen, and we both were seeing the same thing, apparently same description of it, and everything. Mia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she described the same figure, short, broad, gliding like smoke. It wasn't the weed. The realization hit Jake like a punch, his buzz replaced by dread. He stood, adrenaline surging. After it disappears, I get back up to check the spare bedroom and whatnot, make sure all the doors are locked and all that. No windows open. The spare bedroom was empty. The bed untouched, the window sealed. I checked the ceiling fan, because it was on, just to see if the shadow of the fan blades could have possibly been whatever that we saw, but there's just no way possible that it could have been that fan. The fan's blades spun lazily, casting no shadow that could mimic the figure. With the dogs getting scared, and just being able to sense a great presence of energy that night, I fully believed that it was a ghost, or a spirit, or a demon, or something similar. Something was in the house. Jake and Mia sat close, the dogs pressed against them. The TV's chatter, now a distant hum. What was it? The figure hadn't felt human, its movement too fluid, its presence too heavy. Mia whispered about her aunt who'd lived there for years. The backstory to the house, too, is that it was my wife's aunt's house, and she had let us take over to rent it while she moved out with her boyfriend. Her aunt had laughed off their story, blaming the weed. But Jake wasn't so sure. I don't know much about the house otherwise, but the aunt never experienced anything like this, and thinks that we were just tweaking out on weed. The next day, Jake asked a neighbor, an old man with a weathered face, about the house. He spoke of a tenant years ago, a man who died in the spare bedroom. His death hushed up the details, lost. Had he never left, the story gnawed at Jake the figure's broad shoulders, replaying in his mind. Was it angry trapped or something darker? Mia started sleeping with a light on the dogs, refusing to leave her side. Weeks passed, and the house grew restless. The hallway felt narrower, the air thicker. One night, Bella growled at the bathroom door, her fur bristling. Jake swore he heard a low hum, like a voice from the spare bedroom. He didn't check locking their bedroom door instead. Note to that, we stayed in this house for a few more weeks before we finally moved out. The move was a relief, but the shadow lingered in Jake's memory, a stain that didn't fade. Years later, the house still haunts them. Jake quit smoking, but the clarity didn't erase the figure. Mia dreams of it sometimes, gliding through walls, watching. They never returned to the house, but a friend who visited later mentioned a cold spot in the spare bedroom, a heaviness that made her leave. Whatever it was, it's still there, waiting for the next tenant to notice. The eyes of the moose man. Some things in the woods don't belong. As a kid, I thought the forest behind my grandmother's house was a playground, a place of adventure, where my cousins and I could run free. But that Thanksgiving, when I was one of the youngest in our sprawling family, I learned the truth. The trees hid something older, hungrier, something that watched us long before we saw it. And once it saw you, it never forgot. The air was thick that day, sweet with pine and damp earth, but it carried a weight I couldn't name. My cousins and I always explored the woods, climbing old stone walls, chasing frogs by the ponds. But this time, my older cousin Jake and I broke away, driven by a restless need to go deeper past the familiar paths. The forest grew dense, the light dim, and every step felt like crossing a line we couldn't uncross. We found a rock outcropping high above a steep drop. My skin prickled not from the cold, but from something else. Down below at the base of the embankment stood a figure, tall, thin, draped in tattered rags. It faced away, motionless, like it was waiting. I froze, my mind racing. Was it a person? A trick of the light? Then it moved, just a twitch, and my blood turned to ice. I nudged Jake. My eyes locked on the figure. He looked, and I saw it in his face. Pure dread, the kind that sinks into your bones. We didn't speak, didn't breathe. The figure turned slow and deliberate, and I saw its face. Not human, not animal, but a twisted mask of a moose. Its antlers jagged, its eyes black and endless. It stared right at me, and in that moment, I knew it wanted me not just to chase, but to consume. We ran. The forest seemed to warp around us, branches clawing at my arms, the air growing heavy, almost alive. I felt it behind us, not chasing, but following its presence, a shadow that didn't need to move fast to catch you. My legs burned. My heart pounded. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods themselves were conspiring to keep us there, to feed us to whatever that thing was. When I was a child, my family would go to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. It was a ritual, all of us piling into her secluded home, tucked against a vast stretch of woods that seemed to go on forever. Her house was adorned with Native American artwork and artifacts, masks, and woven baskets that always felt like they were watching. My cousins and I would go off and explore the woods behind her house together, laughing as we balanced on ancient stone walls or scooped up frogs from murky ponds. The air was sweet and thick back there, and so it was really pleasant. But those woods held secrets, traces of the people who'd lived there long before us. An abandoned sweat lodge covered in animal hides I never dared approach, and old stone arrowheads in the dirt. That year, Jake and I wanted more than the usual games. One Thanksgiving, one of my older cousins and I paired off from a larger group, hungry to venture deeper than we ever had. We walked through a fairly thick, unfamiliar portion of the woods until we reached the top of a large rock outcropping at the edge of a steep embankment. My skin crawled, a warning I couldn't ignore. I saw a tall, humanoid figure in ragged clothes at the bottom of the embankment, about 30 to 40 feet down, facing away from me and my cousin. I wondered if it was someone hurt, someone we should help. But when it shifted, my curiosity turned to fear. I tapped my cousin and signaled for him to look down at the figure. His eyes widened, his face pale. The figure turned toward us. This tall, lanky, ragged humanoid figure had the face of a moose, and it was looking dead at me. Its gaze was a void pulling me in. I knew that it wanted to eat me. We bolted, tearing through the underbrush, the forest closing in like a trap. As I ran, I could feel that we were being pursued. Jake was faster, his steps pulling ahead, leaving me to stumble behind. The air also suddenly grew thicker and hazier, and the woods changed around us. Then, impossibly, we stumbled into a clearing in the woods that did not exist when we had passed through originally. The air was heavy, almost green, alive with fireflies floating everywhere. The ground was strange, marked with circles of mushrooms, glowing faintly in the dusk. It felt wrong, like the clearing was pulling us in, whispering for us to stay. It was very disorienting, and it felt like the clearing was luring me to stay forever. Then a voice cut through the haze, my mother's calling my name. I heard my mom call out to me through the woods. She, along with some of my uncles and aunts, came to look for me and my cousin. It was getting dark time for dinner. Her voice was a lifeline, snapping me out of the trance. Her call pierced through the fog of this experience, breaking whatever curse was on me and my cousin, allowing us to finally run away and escape. We burst out of the woods, gasping, and told everyone about the Moose Man, how it chased us, how it hungered. We told the others what we had seen, that we had been pursued by a Moose Man who wanted to eat us, but nobody believed us. I wanted to believe it was over, but the night wasn't done with us. After dinner, the kids spilled back outside, playing a game called Manhunt, darting through the yard and brushing the edge of the woods. All of the kids went back outside to play in the yard, running behind the sheds and cutting in and out of the woods at the edge of the yard. I stayed close to the group, still shaken, but comforted by the chatter and laughter. As a large group of us were trying to locate the last of the fugitives, one of my cousins shone a big flashlight into the woods. The beam caught one of our cousins hiding in a bush, and behind him, towering over the branches, was a tall, ragged humanoid figure with the head of a moose. Its eyes locked onto us, unblinking, and the air turned cold. We all instantly screamed and sprinted back inside. The game ended there, the woods off limits for the rest of the night. The adults brushed it off as kids' imaginations, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. My grandmother, though, was quieter than usual, her gaze lingering on the masks lining her walls. I never forgot that face, those eyes. Years later, I learned about the Wendigo, a creature from native stories, a spirit of hunger that stalks the woods. It fit too well, the height, the antlers, the insatiable need. Sometimes I bring up this event with my cousins to see if they still remember, and they do, but they really hesitate to talk about it. I've gone back to those woods as an adult, standing at the edge where the trees swallow the light. The air still feels wrong, like it's waiting. I've never seen the Moose Man again, but I feel him in the silence, in the shadows. My grandmother's house is gone now, sold off, but the woods remain. I wonder if it's still out there, watching, hungry for someone new to cross its path. Every Thanksgiving I think of it, and I check the locks on my doors just in case. The forest doesn't forgive. I tell myself it was a childish fear, a trick of the mind, but the memory is too sharp, too real. My cousins won't talk about it, but I see it in their eyes. They know. Something was in those woods, and it wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something else, something that wanted us, and I'll never step foot in that forest again. I write this now because I need to. The Moose Man. The Wendigo. Whatever it was, it's still with me. Every rustle outside my window, every shadow that moves too fast, feels like it's calling me back. I don't know if it's still out there, but I know one thing: it remembers me. And I'm afraid that one day it'll come to finish what it started. The crying shadow. The house was never quiet. Not truly. Even in the dead of night, when the world should have slept, a restless energy pulsed through its walls. I'd lie in my room, the only girl among a house full of boys, clutching my blanket, waiting for the sound that came without fail. Was it the wind, the creak of old wood, or something else? Something that knew my name? The darkness seemed to listen, its silence heavy with intent. It always began the same. A sob, sharp and desperate, cut through the stillness, a boy's voice trembling with fear. I'd bolt upright, heart racing as a woman's voice followed soft but cold, murmuring words I couldn't quite catch. "Shush, almost done," she said it every night. Her tone a lullaby, laced with menace. I'd strain to hear, to prove it was just a dream. But the cries were reel to reel, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. The shadows moved. My room, small and solitary, felt like a cage, its walls closing in as the sounds grew louder. I'd stare at the door, half expecting it to open to reveal the source of the terror. Who was the boy? And why did he cry? Every night, and it never missed a night. I was awoken, terrified, to a little boy screaming and crying, while I would hear a woman say, "Shush, almost done." The words haunted me, a ritual I couldn't escape. I wasn't alone. The realization hit one night as I huddled under my covers, humming to drown out the noise. I remember one night in particular, that I was laying there under the blankets, terrified, humming to myself while the same thing happened. Then a breath close and deliberate brushed my ear. When out of nowhere, I hear a woman whisper into my ear, "You're mine." My blood froze, my body rigid as the voice claimed me. Its words a chain I couldn't break. I had to escape. After many nights of being awoken and terrified, I would start to sleep with my mother. Her room was a refuge, her presence a shield against the dark. But even there, the house watched. I still remember the first time seeing this little boy. It was one night when I was sleeping with my mother, and she got up to go to the bathroom. I was hearing the same thing this night, so I ended up following her. As we passed an empty room, I look into the empty room, which isn't a bedroom, and I see a black, small silhouette of a little boy standing there, staring dead straight at us. His eyes, if he had them, burned into me, and I ran to my mother's side trembling. The boy wasn't a dream. I saw the little boy again. I was laying in bed, wide awake, and I could see at the bedroom. This bedroom was at the end of the hall, by the way. From my bed, I watched the hallway's end, where a blank wall stood. I saw the same little black silhouette of a boy come out of the wall and walk slowly down the hall, staring straight ahead of him. He moved without sound, his form flickering like smoke, and I hid under the blankets, heart pounding, praying he wouldn't turn toward me. The house had rules. I knew each time the crying would eventually stop. When the distant rumble of a train passed, the sounds faded as if the world's pulse reset the night. I lived by a railroad, and every time the railroad would go, all of it would stop. But the silence that followed was worse, heavy with the promise of another night, another cry. I stopped sleeping alone, clinging to my mother. But the house followed me. Its whispers, "Sieberfer." No one believed me. Everybody's thinking little me was crazy because nobody heard or saw anything at night. I'd tell my brothers, my mother Tracy, but their eyes held pity and trust. Was I imagining it? Or was the house hiding its truth from them? I started doubting myself, wondering if fear had painted the boy the voice until someone broke the silence. Paul Tracy's boyfriend spoke up and said that if he's up late at night by himself, he would also hear and see, and I quote, "sketchy stuff." His words were a lifeline, proof I wasn't alone in the dark. The house grew bolder. Every night the woman's footsteps paced the hallway, her whispers weaving through the walls. I'd lie awake, counting her steps, waiting for the moment she'd pause outside my door. Was she the boy's keeper, his tormentor, or something worse? The cries grew sharper. The boy's fear, a mirror of my own. I stopped exploring the house alone, avoiding the empty room where I'd seen him, its doorway a gate to something I couldn't face. I tried to understand. What did they want? And why us? The house was old. Its history, a blank page I couldn't read. I tried to look up any information about the house, but I couldn't find anything. I asked my mother Tracy, even Paul, but they knew nothing or wouldn't say. The railroad's rhythm became my only comfort, a signal that the night's terror would pause, if only for a moment. But the fear stayed a guest that never left. The whispers became personal. I'd feel her presence, her voice curling around me, claiming me as hers. I started praying, though I didn't know to whom, clutching my mother's hand in the dark. The boy's silhouette haunted my dreams, his silent march a warning I couldn't decode. Paul's confirmation gave me courage, but not answers. He'd seen things, heard things, but he wouldn't speak of them. his face tight with unease. The house was a trap. Its walls held us its shadows, watched its cries bound us to its will. I stopped humming, stopped hoping it would end. The woman, the boy, they were part of the house, and the house was part of us. I'd wake to find my door ajar. Though I'd locked it, the hallway stretching into darkness. Was she waiting, her hand outstretched, ready to pull me in? We left eventually, the house too heavy to bear. The move was a blur, a desperate escape from a place that didn't want to let go. I never saw the boy again, never heard the woman's voice, but they followed me in other ways. My dreams carried their echoes, my nights marked by a fear I couldn't shake. The new house was quiet, its air clean, but I checked the corners, listened for footsteps just in case. I tried to piece it together. I used to think that it was just spirits, but now that I'm older, I believe that it truly was something darker than just spirits. The boy's cries, the woman's claim, they weren't ghosts, not in the way stories tell. They were something else, something that fed on fear, that thrived in the house's bones. I asked Paul years later, but he shook his head, unwilling to revisit the nights he'd seen too much. The house is gone from my life, but not my mind. I drive through that town sometimes, slowing near the street, searching for the roofline. It looks ordinary now, its windows blank, but I know better. The boy is still there, crying. The woman still pacing her whisper, waiting for someone new. I don't stop, don't knock. The house doesn't need me anymore, but I'll never forget what it took. I live lighter now, but I'm marked. The world feels fragile, its shadows deeper, its silences louder. I sleep with a light on, check the locks. Listen for trains in the distance. The boy, the woman, they're mine in a way. A piece of me I can't unsee. I cannot remember any specific circumstances after the ones that I mentioned above, but this happened for years. And I know, as I always will, that some houses hold more than walls. They hold horrors that claim you and never let go. The stranger's warning. The city pulsed with life. Its central streets a chaotic dance of footsteps and voices outside a towering department store in Mexico. That day, I went to buy a birthday cake for my best friend, among some other things. So I had a lot of things to carry. My arms ached under the weight of bags the cake box balanced precariously, and I usually walk home. It's not that far, but since I had a lot to carry, I decided to wait for the bus. The bus stop was crowded, a sea of strangers, yet I felt exposed. And since I was in a very central part of the city, there are a lot of people walking around and waiting for the bus. I leaned against the store's cool glass, steadying myself. Then a woman emerged from the crowd, her eyes locking onto mine with unsettling intent. Her approach was swift, her voice low and urgent. I was leaning against a window of the department store while carrying the bags and trying to keep my balance so the cake wouldn't slip when a woman approached me and started talking to me. She seemed ordinary at first, her worn clothes blending into the urban tapestry. I don't know what I look like since people always approach me to talk to me easily, even though I'm quite introverted. So it didn't seem too strange to me at the time. As an introvert, I was used to these fleeting encounters, but her words cut through. However, one of the first things that she said to me was a warning. Something like, "Be very careful with your things. There are very bad people around. Someone can steal from you." I nodded grateful, but a prickle of unease stirred. Her warning felt rehearsed too. Pointed for kindness, she didn't stop. I took it as kind words and really didn't pay too much attention to it. However, the woman began to ask me where I lived, what bus I took, what my parents' names were, what they did for a living, where I would go. The questions were sharp, invasive, peeling back layers I guarded. The questions were probing, to say the least, and it gave me a bit of a bad feeling, so I lied about all of them, following my mother's advice regarding strangers. My mother's voice echoed. Never trust strangers, so I wove a web of half-truths. Her eyes gleamed unblinking as she pressed closer. And then she began to tell me nonsensical things about her personal life, and she really just had no verbal coherence. Her stories were disjointed, a jumble of names and places that made no sense. I felt trapped, her presence a weight I couldn't shake. The conversation twisted further. I didn't understand anything she was saying, as if she was telling me random stories and connecting them in sort of absurd ways. Her words spilled out chaotic like a script gone wrong. I noticed that there was something very weird about her when I examined her too. Her face was delirious, looking almost to the sky. Her eyes opened wide when she spoke nonsense to me. Her face was feverish, eyes wide and darting upward, as if seeing something beyond me. And she had a disheveled appearance that I had not noticed before. Her clothes were tattered, her hair concealed details I'd missed in the crowd. I sincerely thought that she had schizophrenia or something like that. I wondered if she was unwell, but the thought didn't ease my growing fear. And then she began to get very close to me, invading my personal space and repeating the same warning from the beginning over and over again. She leaned in, her breath hot, her warning now a mantra. Again, I began to get scared by this, and I moved away from her. My retreat was futile. Even a woman saw us, and also seemed surprised. And at some point, the woman cornered me and got so close to my face that I felt as if I was being harassed or something. A passerby's glance caught my eye, her shock mirroring mine, but she didn't intervene. I forgot to mention, too, that when I said which bus I would take, she suddenly said that she was going to take that one too, even though she told me that she was going somewhere different. Her story shifted, claiming she'd visit a brother on my route. She spontaneously made up that she was going to visit her brother or whatever, and that's why she would take that bus with me. The lie was flimsy, her intent clear. I then told her that I think it would be better if I walked in the end, because the bus was taking too long. I edged away, clutching my bags, desperate to escape. She wouldn't let go. But she just would not let me go. And when I insisted on going, she told me that she would accompany me because she was going to the same place. Her insistence was a cage, her words a trap. Honestly, I didn't understand what she was saying, and in the end, already quite nervous and scared, I told her that I would walk, and I said goodbye, pretending to be nice. I forced a smile, my voice steady despite the panic, and I simply walked to leave, and then she started following me from behind for about a block. Her footsteps echoed mine, a shadow I couldn't shake. When I turned to change street, I had to run without even caring about the cake until finally I lost her. I sprinted the cake box, slipping, my heart pounding until the crowd swallowed her. I got the impression that if she didn't have any intentions of assaulting me at any opportunity, then maybe she was waiting for us to be alone somewhere so that she could do something worse. Her pursuit wasn't innocent. Rumors of kidnapping tactics in Mexico haunted me. Sometimes these are kidnapping tactics in Mexico where there are more people involved and all that. The bustling street had saved me, but the what-ifs lingered. Luckily, it was the afternoon, and there were a lot of people still walking around, but really, I don't know what would have happened if I gotten on that bus. Had I boarded, would she have followed her intentions, darkening in isolation? Would she have followed me? To what extent? And to do what I still don't know. But I'm glad that I never had to find out. I walked home shaken. The city's vibrancy now a mask for dangers unseen. Her face a warning I'd never forget. The premonition that saved her. In the warm Hawaiian nights where the ocean's hum should bring peace, a shadow of dread crept into Kalia's young heart. At 11, she was too young to understand the weight of her fear, but old enough to feel its claws tightening with each passing day. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a knowing, a certainty that death was coming, stalking her family. School offered a fleeting escape, but home was a prison of terror, where every moment pulsed with the promise of loss. And when the night arrived, her mother's keys in hand, Kalia's world became a scream she couldn't silence. I had an intense feeling of dread all of a sudden, just absolute dread hanging over me. It came without warning, a suffocating weight that settled over Kalia's chest, stealing her breath. I believe it started Friday and kept building till Thursday. Then next Friday, it comes again. The fear grew, a relentless tide each day, heavier than the last. I go to school and strangely, I don't feel it at all. But the second that I get home, there it is. And it's worse than before. School was a sanctuary, its chatter and routine dulling the dread. But stepping through her front door brought it crashing back, sharper, crueler. I knew too that somebody was going to die that day. I absolutely knew it was going to happen to somebody in my family. The certainty was unshakable, a truth carved into her bones. I spent all day in the living room watching everybody like a hawk as well. Kalia perched on the couch, her eyes darting between her parents, her little siblings, searching for a sign. And I didn't feel it directed towards anyone until later that night, once it got dark. The sun set, and the house dimmed, the dread coiling tighter, a snake ready to strike. It had been building and building, and I felt like I was going to explode. Her mother, Leilani, crossed the room, her purse slung over her shoulder. Then my mother walks by me and grabs her keys and says that she's going somewhere. The jingle of keys was a thunderclap in Kalia's ears. I didn't really listen. The blood in my ears was too loud, and all I could see was the keys in her hand and her mouth moving, but no words. Time slowed her mother's lips, forming silent shapes, and I knew then that it was her. If I let her go in that car, I knew that I would never see her alive again. The vision was clear, twisted metal blood darkness swallowing her mother forever, and I flipped out. I had an absolute freak out. Kalia's body moved before her mind could catch up. I threw myself at her feet and grabbed onto her legs and started begging and screaming for her to stay home, just begging and pleading for her not to leave. Her voice cracked raw with terror, tears streaming down her face. I was absolutely hysterical as well, and I just couldn't control my emotions at all. Her screams filled the house, a primal wail, switching between gut-wrenching cries, pleading and attempting to grab the keys from her hand. She clawed at her mother's hand, desperate to stop her. At some point, I started saying, "I don't want you to die," over and over again. "If you leave, you're going to die." Leilani froze, her eyes wide with shock. She was so startled and scared by my behavior that she sat on the couch next to me and held me and put on the news for ambient noise. Kalia clung to her, sobbing, her small body shaking as Leilani's arms wrapped around her. I had successfully gotten her not to leave the house. The keys lay abandoned on the table, the TV's drone a faint comfort. Kalia's siblings hovered nearby, silent, their presence a blur in her panic. She was safe for now, but the dread lingered, a ghost in her chest, watching, waiting. Later, Leilani switched channels, the news shifting to a breaking story. The news channel that she chose was describing and showing helicopter footage of a 13C car piled up on the main road that connects to the road leading to our neighborhood. The screen showed chaos, mangled cars, flashing lights, bodies covered in sheets, and it had happened around the time she would have left, and they were still covering it. Kalia's breath hitched, her eyes glued to the footage. There were only a few survivors. Almost everyone had died, and the survivors were severely injured, and they weren't sure that they would even make it. The reporter's voice was grim, detailing the carnage. The pileup happened on the road that she definitely would have taken. We both sat riveted to the TV watching them interview the bystanders who had witnessed everything and the people who had barely avoided the crash. A woman sobbed, describing the screams. They were shaken, terrified, and crying. A man, blood staining his shirt, spoke of pulling at wreckage, his hands trembling. They interviewed a man that had tried to save people from the crash, and he was covered in blood, and describing the bodies, and talking about how he couldn't save anyone. His voice broke, his eyes haunted. He was beyond shaken, and his body was jittery from the adrenaline and fear. Me and my mother, we just sat in silence. Kalia's heart pounded relief, warring with horror. My little siblings were there too. They had come out when they had heard the screaming. But I don't really remember them doing much, so they aren't very relevant to the story. The room was heavy, the TV's light casting shadows across their faces. What happened afterward is a little bit of a blur for me, because the sheer relief or devastation that I felt was awful. Her mother was alive, but the cost was unthinkable. Dozens dead lives shattered. My mom lived, obviously, but all of those other people had died, and it really felt rotten. I hugged my mom and thanked her for not leaving. Kalia buried her face in Leilani's shoulder, her tears soaking her shirt. She said that she was glad that she didn't leave too, but didn't really speak much. And honestly, I can't blame her. I mean, what's there to say? Words failed them, the weight of what didn't happen too vast. Me and my mom slept in the same bed that night, and I still couldn't let her go. Kalia curled against her, needing her warmth, her heartbeat. I needed to know that she would be okay and would still be alive in the morning. Leilani held her tight, silent but present. She didn't ask me how I knew, but made an offhanded comment about me being psychic. The word hung in the air, half joking, half wondering. Was she? Kalia didn't know, but the dread had been real, a warning from something beyond. Had it chosen her? The thought burrowed deep, a seed of unease. The next day, life resumed. The memory fading like a dream, but its echo lingered a scar on her soul. Years later, the memory returned sharp and vivid. I guess I forgot all about this, but I remembered it all today, and have been feeling all sorts of things ever since then. Kalia, now older, felt the dread again, not as a warning, but as a weight, pulling her back to that night. I could confirm everything with my mom as well, and she has that it was the weirdest experience of her life. Leilani's voice was soft, her eyes distant as she recalled Kalia's screams, the news. I still feel kind of crazy. I mean, my brain forgot all this, but my body remembers the strain of the dread that I was under. Her hands shook her chest tight, as if the fear had never left. I'm feeling the physical effects of it at this very moment, in fact, almost like PTSD-like symptoms. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a gift or a curse. Kalia began noticing patterns, a chill before bad news, a hunch that saved a friend from trouble. Was it always there, waiting to wake? She researched the road, learning of its history, accidents, deaths, a stretch cursed by locals. Had something spoken to her through her? She kept a journal, now tracking her instincts, fearing their return. One night she dreamed of the crash, but this time she was in the car, her mother's keys in her hand. She woke gasping, the dread alive again, whispering of dangers yet to come. Now Kalia listens to her gut. She checks on her family, calls her mother daily, and avoids that road. The premonition saved her mother, but it left a mark, a reminder that some knowledge comes at a cost. She wonders if it will speak again, and what it will demand next. The house that fed on fear. Some houses don't just stand, they wait. In 1999, we thought we'd found a steal, a fixer-upper in Beaver Creek, Oregon, cheap enough to ignore the red flags. But the moment we stepped inside, the air felt wrong heavy, like it was holding a grudge. We laughed it off, chalked it up to old wood and bad vibes. 8 years later, we left broken bankrupt, and certain of one thing: that house wasn't empty. The boarded-up rooms were the first clue. They weren't locked, just sealed, as if someone wanted to keep something in or out. We tore down the boards expecting storage, or maybe a quirky layout, but the rooms were bare, their walls too clean, their silence too loud. We moved in anyway, our family huddling in one corner of the house, telling ourselves it was temporary. But the house had other plans, and it started small, like it was testing us. At night, the hallways whispered. Not voices, not sounds you could name, but a pressure, a feeling that something was watching. We'd wake to find things moved, tools misplaced, doors ajar. My husband, a practical man, blamed our memory, our stress, but I felt it a presence, patient and cruel, waiting for us to crack. It didn't take long before we started to. The arguments came out of nowhere. We'd snap at each other over nothing, our voices sharp, our patience gone. Coming home felt like walking into a trap, the dread so thick it clung to my skin. Leaving was the only relief, a breath of air after drowning. But the house wasn't content with our misery. It wanted more. It wanted fear, and it knew exactly how to get it. Then the attacks began. Scratches on my arms appearing in the night, shallow but deliberate. A shove in the dark, hard enough to bruise. I'd wake gasping, certain something had pressed against my chest, only to find the room empty. My husband didn't believe me, at first thought I was unraveling. But the house wasn't just mine to bear, it was coming for him, too, and it was only a matter of time. In 1990, we lived in a badly possessed or haunted house for about 8 years in Beaver Creek, Oregon. It was a deal too good to be true, with weirdly boarded-up rooms that made no sense. The family had been sleeping in just one area together, as if the rest of the house was off limits. We should have trusted our gut, but we didn't. We immediately took down all the boards to open the rooms and couldn't figure out their purposes. They were empty, sterile, like they'd been scrubbed of history. We were doing construction thinking we could make it ours. The house wasn't terribly old, like maybe 1950s, but it felt ancient, heavy with something we couldn't name. The first signs were subtle. We had the molding stacked on the right side of the hall, labeled to be put back up, ready for renovation. One night we could hear it clanking. When we checked, it had been rolled and moved to the left. We thought we'd misremembered, but the next night it moved back. It wasn't just the house playing tricks. My husband and I were suddenly always arguing for no good reason, our tempers flaring over nothing. We'd have dread about coming home without knowing why, yet felt instant relief to leave. It escalated slowly, insidiously. Over months to full-on getting scratched, hit, terrorized. I'd find marks on my skin, red and stinging, with no explanation. I'd feel blows in the night, invisible, but real. My husband thought I was losing it, especially when he kept hearing me weeping at night, when I wasn't. I was the target at first, the one the house chose to break. But then it turned on him. My husband had his guns missing when he'd been cleaning them, only to have them reappear loaded and pointed at him in off the back of the couch. That was when he believed. We were desperate. We had called multiple churches, none of them would help. I was raised Catholic and their refusal stung, though I wasn't surprised. The Pentecostal church did eventually try to help us, but they didn't like what they found. They spoke of demons, of a presence too strong for a simple exorcism. They'd need the whole congregation to get rid of it. Wanted me to get baptized to move forward. We tried, but they still couldn't get rid of it, and it just came back more ticked off than ever. The rituals only seemed to anger, it make it bolder, We learned to survive. We had to learn to just not feed it any fear or stress or anger, to starve it of what it craved. We had to cleanse every couple of days for the rest of the years that we lived there. I taught myself rituals, drawing from books and instinct, a crash course in occult stuff to deal with it myself. It worked to a point. The attacks lessened, but the house never let us forget it was there. We had such bad luck those whole 8 years that we were there. My husband, a veteran, fought to get his disability recognized, but the system dragged its feet. The house caused us bankruptcy, and we let the bank take it willingly to get out. We couldn't sell it, not after what we'd been through. Leaving wasn't the end. My husband went back up one last time to grab some furniture we'd left behind. The power had been cut, but he came in. All the lights were on. The AC was blowing. Water was running in the faucet. He backed out, called me and said, "You mind if we just leave the rest?" I didn't argue. We left a sofa set and a bunch of other stuff behind. The house could keep it. The first night in our new rental was different. I saw what some would call an angel, a soft light that filled the room, not blinding, but warm. I felt such peace and relief, a strong knowing that it was done and we wouldn't be followed. I slept deeper than I ever had the weight of 8 years gone. I loved that rental, but the house left its mark. We found out the last 3 people who had owned it before us had also filed bankruptcy and had been foreclosed on just like us. It wasn't chance it was the house draining everyone who dared to stay. Living there changed me. Once you've lived with the paranormal like that, you're more open whether you'd like to be or not. Our homes now always have a flicker of something, shadows that linger, objects that shift. I no longer fear it. I'm kind of numb to it. It's normal background noise, but nothing has ever been like that house. A healer I worked with later called it a forced kundalini from overexposure to a strong entity, some kind of spiritual awakening born of trauma. I don't know about that. I'm just glad that we're out of there, and we never had to go back. The years since have been quieter, but I carry it with me. Not fear, not anymore, but a knowing. That house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Feeding on us, twisting our lives until we broke. I walk past similar houses now, old and unassuming, and I wonder, do they wait too? Do they watch? I don't stop to find out. I've learned my lesson. Some deals aren't worth taking, and some houses aren't meant to be homes. I don't tell this story often. People hear haunted house and expect a campfire tale, something to laugh off. But I lived it, and it wasn't a story. It was a fight. 8 years of fighting something I couldn't see, something that knew my weaknesses better than I did. We got out, but not whole. Part of me stayed in that house, and I'm okay with that, as long as it stays there too. Sometimes I dream of Beaver Creek. Not the house, not the rooms, but the feeling, the dread, the weight. The eyes I never saw, but always felt. I wake up checking the corners of the room, half expecting to see that light again. Or worse, the darkness we left behind. It's gone, I tell myself. But some nights, I'm not so sure. The axe bearer. The night was too still. The kind of quiet that presses against your skin. I woke in my bunk bed, the lower mattress creaking under me, my heart pounding from a dream I couldn't recall. The room was dark, the air thick as if it held its breath. Was I alone? Or was something waiting, watching from the shadows? I blinked, trying to shake the unease, but the feeling grew a cold knot in my chest. The darkness had a shape. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A tall, thin figure standing beside my bed, its outline sharp against the dim glow from the window. I opened my eyes a little bit more and see a 6-tall, thin silhouette standing next to my bed. I squinted, heart thudding and squinting. I looked at its face, and it looked like my older brother smiling at me. Why was he here grinning in the dead of night? I opened my mouth to ask, but the words died in my throat. The face wasn't his. I saw my brother's face morph into an androgynous stranger with long blonde hair and a menacing smile. The smile twisted sharp and wrong, stretching too wide for a human mouth. Its eyes gleamed not with warmth, but with hunger, pinning me to the bed. The figure stood motionless, its presence a weight that crushed the air from my lungs. What was it? And why did it wear my brother's face? It moved. It extended its hands, and in one of its hands, I saw an axe with a half-moon blade. The blade caught the faint light, its curve wicked and cruel. The figure began to raise the axe above its head, both hands on the hilt, ready to strike. My body froze, my mind screaming to run, but the figure's gaze held me, its smile promising something I couldn't fathom. The axe gleamed a silent threat that filled the room with dread. It attacked. It jumped toward me. Speed probably half the speed of what you'd expect. The motion was unnatural, too fluid, too deliberate. I shouted as loudly as I could while yanking my covers over my face and turning away from the figure. The scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate, as I curled into the mattress, praying the blanket would shield me. The air shifted heavy with the figure's presence, but no blow came. The scream shattered the night. My scream woke up my whole family. Footsteps thundered down the hall, voices calling my name. I peeked from under the covers, trembling, but the figure was gone. The room empty. Had it been real, or had my mind betrayed me? My parents burst in their faces, pale, checking the corners, the closet finding nothing. But I knew what I'd seen, felt the weight of that axe or the chill of that smile. The room wasn't safe. I also experienced a strange phenomena in that room, like an RC car turning its wheels randomly in the quiet hours of the early morning. Its only controller, though, was resting on my dresser, empty of batteries. The toys whirring broke the silence, a sound without reason mocking my fear. Was it the figure lingering, playing with the edges of my reality? I stopped sleeping alone, crowding into my brother's bed across the hall. But the memory followed. I tried to understand. My question for all of you guys, though, is was this a mimic, and do mimics scare young kids like this? The word mimic felt right, a creature that stole faces that fed on fear. I don't think it was sleep paralysis because I was awake and moving. I don't think it was a dream because I felt like I was awake. But if not a dream, not paralysis, then what I searched for answers, reading about entities, shapeshifters, things that lurk in the dark, but nothing fit the terror of that night. The house changed after. Every creak, every shadow held a threat, a reminder of the figure's gaze. I'd lie awake, scanning the room, waiting for it to return. Was it still here, wearing another face, biding its time? My family dismissed it as a nightmare, but their voices lacked conviction. They hadn't seen. It hadn't felt its malice, its axe raised to strike. I never saw it again, but I carried it. The room was never mine. Not after that. I moved my things across the hall, slept with the light on, checked the dresser for the RC car's controller. The house felt alive, its walls watching its silence a lie. I stopped trusting the dark, stopped trusting my eyes. The figure was gone, but its shadow stayed a scar on my sense of safety. I grew up, but the fear didn't fade. The bunk bed, the room, the house. They're memories now, but they're heavy weighted with that night. I've asked others, shared the story, hoping for clarity, Some say mimics, others demons, some just shrug and call it a kid's imagination. I can't prove that it was a dream within a dream, but honestly, it felt real to me. And that's what haunts me, the reality of it. The axe, the smile. I've searched for patterns for others who've seen what I saw. The RC car, the figure, the way it moved, they don't fit neatly into any tale. I've read about entities that borrow faces that thrive on terror, but none match the precision of its attack the way it chose me. Was it tied to the house to me, or to something I'll never know? The questions linger unanswered, a puzzle I carry. The house is someone else's now. I wonder if they feel it, if the figure visits them axe in hand. I drive past, sometimes glancing at the windows, searching for a sign. The house looks normal, but I know its secret, its hunger. I don't stop, don't linger. The figure doesn't need me anymore, but I'll never forget its face, its blade, its claim. I live differently now. The world feels thinner, its edges sharp with possibility. I sleep with a lamp on check, the shadows. Listen for sounds that don't belong. The figure was a moment, but it reshaped me, taught me fear in a way I can't unlearn. I don't know what it was, mimic, spirit, or something else, but I know it was real. And it was mine. And sometimes, in the quiet, I feel it watching, waiting for me to close my eyes. The man who walked twice. The town was hushed. Its streets slick with rain, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. I was heading towards the bus stop, where I waited for the bus every day. As an elementary school kid, I trudged along, my music school bag slung over my shoulder. I remember that it was raining, everything was still wet, and I was carrying my umbrella folded in my hand. The umbrella, damp and heavy, swung in my grip. Now there was a place to sit at the bus stop. So I sat down, put my umbrella between my legs. I settled onto the bench, the cold metal biting through my clothes. Without phones to distract me, I stared at the puddles, their ripples hypnotic. But something felt off, a quiet that pressed too close. The world seemed to slow, each sound sharpened by the rain's rhythm. And since it was the time without mobile phones, I was just looking at the ground. Occasionally, I would look up towards the street to see if my bus was coming. My eyes flicked to the road, searching for the bus's familiar shape. I looked up, glanced to the left, and saw a mailman with a big, heavy B, holding an umbrella with a wooden handle shaped like a duck's head. His figure cut through the mist, the duck's head handle glinting oddly. I followed him with my eyes and focused on that umbrella as he passed by me. I watched, mesmerized, as he moved past, his steps steady. His presence was ordinary, yet it snagged my attention, a detail I couldn't shake. I let my gaze drop the ground, reclaiming my focus. I saw him from behind and noticed that his pant legs were muddy and wet from the rain. The mud clung to his trousers, a mark of the storm. I didn't pay too much attention though, and I looked down for about another 10 seconds. I counted the cracks in the pavement, lost in thought. When I looked up again, I looked to the left, and that was when I saw the same mailman coming towards me. But it was again with the same bag and the same umbrella, with a wooden handle shaped like a duck's head. My heart lurched. The same man, same bag, same duck's head umbrella, approaching from the same direction. It was impossible. At that moment, I was sort of startled. The bus's rumble snapped me back. The bus arrived. I got on the bus through the front door and watched the mailman until he turned into a yard. I pressed my face to the window, tracking him as he vanished into a yard. His figure swallowed by the rain. And to this day, I really still don't understand what the heck happened there, and how it was even possible to see the same person twice within about 10 seconds coming from the same direction. My child's mind raced, grappling with the paradox. How could he be there again, unchanged, as if time had looped? The bus carried me away, but the image stuck. His muddy pants, the duck's head the way he walked twice. I told no one. The memory a secret I buried too strange to share. Years passed, but the moment lingered a splinter in my thoughts. I'd rationalized it as a trick of tired eyes, a childish misjudgment. Yet the clarity never faded the mailman's deliberate stride. The umbrella's odd handle. Was he a glitch in the world, a figure caught in some unseen cycle? I revisited the bus stop in my mind, its bench now a marker of mystery. The town with its quiet streets and rainy days held a secret it wouldn't tell. I wondered if others had seen him, if the mailman still walked that path, appearing twice to unsuspecting eyes. The memory was a question without an answer, a fleeting encounter that bent reality, leaving me to wonder what I'd truly seen. The ceilings pull. The living room was a refuge, a sanctuary from the nightmares that haunted Lena's sleep. But tonight, it betrayed her. As she lay on her spare mattress, the apartment's quiet hum turned sinister. A pulse of malice threading through the air. Her body, heavy with exhaustion, began to stir, not by her will, but by something unseen, something that hungered. It wasn't a dream. It was real, a force lifting her toward the ceiling where darkness waited with open jaws. And in that moment, Lena knew she wasn't alone. She was prey, caught in a grip no human hand could wield. I've always struggled and suffered with sleeping issues, insomnia, nightmares, lucid dreams, and even some sleep paralysis. Lena's nights were a battlefield, her mind a maze of terrors that left her drained. These things run throughout my family quite frequently, in fact. Her mother spoke of shadows in her dreams, her brother of voices that woke him. Now, due to my negative association with my own bed, and by extension my bedroom as a whole, I would often sleep on a spare mattress in the middle of the living room. The living room felt safer, its open space a shield against the claustrophobia of her bedroom's walls. This night was no different, until I would feel myself slowly slipping into consciousness. Her eyes fluttered, caught between sleep and waking, when a strange sensation gripped her, but only due to an unusual feeling that being my limp body being gently and slowly lifted up towards the ceiling. It was no dream. Her body rose weightless, the mattress receding below. I distinctly recall the feeling of my long hair dangling below me too. Her hair swayed a pendulum in the still air, brushing her shoulders as she hovered. As I floated there above my bed, I would feel this overwhelming sense of danger, doom, and plain evilness. A malevolent presence pressed against her, its intent cold and predatory, seeping into her bones. My heart was beating intensely, and my mind was racing, but I couldn't move. Lena's pulse thundered her thoughts, a frantic whirl, but her limbs were locked, betraying her. I tried to scream and talk, but I couldn't get anything out. Her throat tightened, her voice trapped as if the air itself stifled her cries. It felt like an eternity until some noise from the apartment would force whatever was going on to finally release me. A distant clatter, perhaps a neighbor's door, shattered the spell. I would feel myself hit my mattress before pouncing up petrified. Her body slammed into the mattress, the impact jarring, undeniable. She gasped, bolting upright, her skin clammy with sweat. The room was wrong. I hit the mattress quite hard, and I remember even seeing some things moved around that just didn't make Mac sense, unless I actually fell from that height. A lamp teetered on its stand, books skewed on the coffee table, as if nudged by an unseen hand. Lena's breath hitched. She hadn't imagined it. Something had lifted her, held her, and let her fall. Her heart still raced, the evil she'd felt lingering like a stain. She flicked on every light, the glow a frail defense against the dark. What was it? Not sleep paralysis. Her family's stories never mentioned falling. never left physical traces. She didn't sleep that night, her eyes scanning the ceiling, half expecting it to pull her again. For a week, she kept the lights on the living room, her fortress. But the fear followed. Was it still there? Watching Lena confided in her mother, who spoke of old Hawaiian tales, entities that roamed homes, feeding on fear, drawn to those who saw too much. Had she invited it with her sleepless nights? The thought chilled her, but the apartment offered no answers. Its walls silent, its corners too deep. A friend versed in local lore suggested cleansing the space, sage prayers, salt at the doors. Lena tried it, the smoke curling upward, but the air stayed heavy, unmoved. One night, she felt it again, a tug, faint, but real, lifting her an inch before letting go. She moved the mattress to her mother's room, refusing to be alone. The tug didn't return, but the memory did, sharp and unyielding, a reminder of the night she was claimed. Years later, Lena still feels it. The dread creeps in when she's alone, her body tensing as if waiting for the pull. She sleeps with a light on her new apartment, far from that cursed place, but the ceiling looms in her dreams. A neighbor once mentioned flickering lights in her old building, a cold spot in the living room. Lena didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Whatever it was, it's still there waiting for someone else to drift too close to the edge of sleep. The unseen staff. The office was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of healing, but it had its own secrets. I worked in a small medical practice, a quiet building where the hum of fluorescent lights and the chatter of patients filled the days. But when the doors closed and the world went silent, something else took over. It wasn't just empty, it was waiting, and it didn't like us lingering past closing time. My coworker Lisa learned that the hard way. She came in one morning to open, expecting the usual stillness of an empty office. Instead, she found the door unlocked, every light blazing, the radio humming softly in the background. No one was there. No cars in the lot, no footprints. Nothing. Only two of us had keys, and our boss was halfway across the country. Whoever, or whatever, opened that door wasn't human. Lisa laughed it off later, but her eyes told a different story. She'd walked into that glowing, unnatural office and called out, her voice trembling. "Hello." We teased her mercilessly, said she'd be the first to go in a horror movie. But deep down, we all felt it. The unease, the sense that we weren't alone in that building even when we should have been. It wasn't just Lisa. The office had a way of making you feel watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement shadows that didn't belong, especially on weekends when I slipped in to use the gym. The air would shift like someone had brushed past close enough to feel, but never seen. We all had stories, little moments that piled up until they couldn't be ignored. The office wasn't just a workplace, it was a boundary, and we were crossing it. The worst came after hours, when the building seemed to wake up. Sounds no one could explain, voices that didn't belong, objects that moved when no one was looking. We tried to shrug it off to keep the lights on and the jokes flowing, but the truth was heavier. Something was there, and it wanted us gone. It wasn't violent, not exactly, but it was persistent, and it knew how to make us listen. I worked in a medical office, a tidy little practice where we patched up patients and sent them home with a smile. But the building had a shadow, one that didn't show up on x-rays. My coworker said that she came in one morning to open up, but when she got there, the door was already unlocked. Every light was on the radio, playing softly, like someone had beaten her to it. The building appeared empty. No cars in the parking lot either. Only she and I had keys, and our boss was out of town at the time. We all closed the office together the day before, like usual. 3 of us double-checking everything. It was usually 3 of us that collaboratively did it, which we all remember doing. Lisa was rattled. Scared and shaky, she said that she didn't know what else to do, but to walk in and timidly go, "Hello." When she told me, I laughed. "You didn't? Did you?" We turned it into a running gag, joking that she would be the first to die in a horror movie. She'd bring it up sometimes, and we'd chuckle, but the humor was thin. On another occasion, my coworker said that she would be there by herself in the morning hours and feel someone walk behind her as she had her back turned, like the air moves when somebody walks past you real close. She'd spin around expecting a patient, but nobody was there. The new girl who replaced her reported the same thing happening from time to time. I had my own encounters. I used to come in on the weekends to use our gym. The first time I saw a dark, shadowy head peek out at me from the corner of the hallway, then sort of dart back like I'd startled it. I knew it was our ghost by then, so I started saying, "Hey, it's just me," when I arrived to keep it calm. It happened the first few times, and then eventually it stopped, like it got used to my Sunday visits. But then I was there by myself on a Sunday too, when I saw a tall man standing in the gym as I passed the hallway, and he was looking at me. He was different, shorter, less distinct than the hallway shadow. I sort of did a double take, but when I went back to check the gym, nobody was there. Our new physical therapist, a Filipino guy named Marco, saw him too. Our new Filipino PT saw the same tall man standing in the back office area where our desks and computers sat. He thought it was a patient needing help, but there was no one. He asked if a patient had just gone into the back office. We said no, and the secretary got really scared. Marco shrugged, saying he thought it must have just been a spirit common in the Philippines. Nothing to worry about. That didn't help. It made all of us really feel a bit more unsettled. The activity spiked when we stayed late. I was closing up one day, and I was the last person to leave. I'd stayed to finish paperwork, and the activity always ramped up past 500 p.m., if anyone was still there or on weekends. I heard an elderly man say, "Help me," as if he were right beside me. I knew no one was there, but I went around to every room to make sure no patient was left. I was the only one there. Another time, I was the last person in the building again. A patient's car needed towing blocking mine, so I opted to just wait inside. Then I heard dishes crashing in the kitchen, our tiny break room. It was as if someone was violently throwing them. I didn't check. I decided to just get out of there as quickly as I could and to just wait outside. I think the ghosts or whatever, they just didn't like it when we were invading their personal time. After hours was the worst, though incidences were less frequent during the middle of the day or work week, maybe because we were too busy to notice. My coworkers had their own stories. The secretary said that she was working late at night with our billing lead, setting up something on the computer when the radio turned on by itself. It was all static, then started flipping through channels. She got really scared, and they left. I don't work there anymore, and to be honest, I'm actually grateful for that. The office wasn't haunted in the way movies show, no chains rattling, no apparitions screaming. It was subtler, a constant nudge that we were intruders. The tall man, the hallway shadow, the voice, they weren't angry, just territorial. I started to think of them as staff like us working the night shift, Lisa's replacement. Emily felt the same air shifts, the same unseen footsteps. Marco's stories from the Philippines made me wonder if we were dealing with something cultural, something tied to the land or the building's past. One evening, I stayed late to organize patient files. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I was alone. Or so I thought when a pen rolled off my desk. Not fell, rolled slow and deliberate, like someone had flicked it. I froze, waiting for the air to shift, for that familiar brush of movement. Nothing came, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome, I left faster than I'd planned. The weekend incidents were the hardest to shake. Sundays when I'd slip in for the gym felt like stepping into someone else's home. The hallway shadow stopped appearing, but I'd still feel eyes on me, especially near the back office. Once I heard a chair scrape across the floor in there, sharp and sudden, I called out. It's just me, like always. But the silence that followed was heavier, like I'd interrupted something. Marco's calm about it all was infuriating. He'd laugh, say spirits were everywhere in his hometown, nothing to fear. But we weren't in the Philippines, and these weren't his spirits. The secretary Jen stopped staying late after the radio incident. She'd been there longest, knew the building's quirks, but that night broke her. The billing lead who'd been with her quit soon after. They never said why, but we all knew. The elderly man's voice haunted me most. "Help me," he'd said, clear as day, right beside my ear. I'd searched every room, heart pounding, knowing I'd find nothing. It wasn't a patient, wasn't a prank. It was something else. Something that wanted my attention. I never heard it again, but I felt it, that plea lingering in the air, especially when I was alone. The kitchen incident was my breaking point. I'd waited out the tow truck trying to stay calm when the dishes started crashing. Not falling, smashing like someone was hurling them against the walls. I didn't need to see it to know. I grabbed my bag and waited in the parking lot, the office's lights glowing behind me like a warning. After that, I avoided staying late unless I had to. We all had theories. Jen thought the spirits were former patients tied to the office's history. Marco suggested the land itself, something older than the building. I leaned toward the idea that we were just in their way. The office was theirs after hours, and we were trespassing. The daytime was fine, busy, bright, full of life. But at night or on weekends, it belonged to them. When I left the job, it wasn't just for a better offer. I was tired. Tired of the glances between coworkers, the unspoken agreement that something was off. The new hires kept reporting the same things. Shadows, voices, objects, moving. It wasn't going away. I don't know if it ever will. The building's still there. Still a medical office, still humming with patients by day, and something else by night. I don't miss it. The jokes about Lisa's horror movie bravery, the way we'd all pretend it was nothing. They kept us sane, but they didn't change the truth. That office wasn't ours, not completely. Something else worked there, walked its halls, and watched us when we thought we were alone. I'm glad I'm gone, but I still wonder who they were. Sometimes I drive by the old office, its windows dark, its parking lot empty. I don't stop. I don't need to. I can feel it from the road, that same weight, that same presence. It's still there, waiting for the next shift to clock out, for the next person to stay too long. And I know deep down it's not done. The growl below. The basement door creaked, a sound that echoed like a warning. My mother stood at the top of the stairs, basket of laundry in hand, staring into the darkness below. The air felt wrong, heavy with an unseen weight that pressed against her skin. Was it just the chill of the underground, or something else? Something alive, waiting in the shadows. She gripped the basket tighter, her instinct screaming to turn back. The stairs descended into silence. Each step groaned under her weight, the wood old and splintered, as if reluctant to let her pass. She got downstairs, and while on her way down, she started to feel anxious, or watched a little bit scared. A prickling unease crawled up her spine. You know that weird sort of bad feeling that tells you that you should not stay there. That's what she had. She tried to shake it to focus on the task, but the basement seemed to breathe its pulse, a quiet threat. The task kept her there. Like I said, though, she needed to do the laundry, so that's what she did. There she was, putting the clothes in the washing machine. This feeling was still there, and was growing. The machine's hum was her only company, but it couldn't drown out the sensation of eyes on her, unseen and relentless. The air thickened, the shadows deepened, and she felt it a presence close watching, waiting for her to falter. It spoke. While she was still put the clothes in the washing machine, she heard something growl. A low, long, menacing growl, but it was coming from far from her. The sound was deep, guttural, not animal, but not human, echoing from the basement's far corner. Her hands froze, her heart hammering, as the growl lingered a promise of something cruel. My courageous mother decided to stay there, just going faster, because now she truly was scared. Which is understandable, but courage wasn't enough. The basement had her now. It drew closer. A couple of seconds later, she heard it again, a bit closer to her this time, and a lot more menacing. The growl rolled through the dark, sharper, hungrier, as if the source had moved, stalking her. She slammed the machine's lid shut, hands trembling, and turned to the basket of clean clothes. While she was taking them to transfer them into a basket, she heard it again, and it was closer, so close that she felt its breath this time, caressing her neck. The cold touch burned a violation that sent her heart into her throat. She ran. In panic, she finally decided to just get upstairs, getting out of the basement. The stairs loomed ahead, her only escape, but not even after she got like the third step. Though she felt something grabbing her foot. Not exactly. But you know what I mean, Treps. Her ankle caught a force tugging her back, invisible, but real. She stumbled, clutching the railing, and she almost fell at the hold. And again she heard this growl. The sound was everywhere inside her, urging her to stay, to surrender. The stairs fought her. Not even at the halfway point, she suddenly lost her breath. She described it like someone was strangling her, just without the feeling of hands around her neck. Her lungs burned the air stolen, as if the basement itself refused to let her go. She also says that she felt like a hold on her, making it harder for her to get up the stairs. It was like somebody was pushing her, forcing her to get back into the basement. Her body grew heavy, each step a battle against an unseen hand pressing her down. She was carrying more than laundry. She fell at that all of a sudden, and without any air, she literally needed to crawl up the stairs. Plus, she was pregnant at the time, so just imagine how much harder it was. Her knees scraped the wood, her hands clawing for purchase, the basket abandoned below. The growl followed low and triumphant, as if the basement knew she was weakening. Every movement was agony, her unborn child a weight that anchored her to the fight. She reached the top. She finally reached the door, though, and she said that as soon as she passed that door and closed it, her breath came back immediately. The door slammed shut, a barrier between her and the dark. She was no longer feeling this weird feeling and this sensation of being watched. Now she felt safe. The house above was warm, alive, free of the basement's grip, but her hands shook her body, marked by the ordeal. The basement kept its secrets. I've slept in that basement for quite some time, and I have never felt or experienced anything like this. I'd spent nights down there, my bed in the same space, but the air was always still, the shadows empty. Why her and not me? I really don't know why, but maybe since she's religious, something bad tried to do something to her, or hurt her, or something. Her faith. Her light, had it drawn the darkness, or was it something older, tied to the house itself? The story didn't end at the door. My mother never went back to the basement alone, not after that. She'd send me or my brothers, her eyes sharp with a fear she wouldn't name. The washing machine ran. The clothes got clean, but the basement was no longer hers. I'd stand at the top of the stairs listening, waiting for the growl, but it never came for me. Was it waiting, biding its time, or had it claimed what it wanted? I asked her for more. I can also ask her for some more stories if you'd like, as she's experienced a lot of paranormal stuff. Maybe not as scary as that one, but they are, for sure, still pretty creepy. She'd laugh, call the house lively, but her stories carried weight. Flickering lights, footsteps in empty rooms, a chill that followed her. The house was alive, its pulse strongest below where the shadows held their secrets. I tried to understand. If somebody has an explanation or questions, and it would be great to read it and to reach out, and I would be glad to try and answer what I can. I searched for answers, digging into the house's history, but found nothing. No deaths, no tragedies, just a quiet town and an ordinary lot. Yet the growl was real. The force that held her was real. Was it a spirit, a demon, or something the house itself had birthed? The basement is still there. I walk past it now. The door closed, the stairs hidden, but I feel it a pull, a whisper of what lies below. I've slept in that space, felt its quiet, but I don't trust it. The house knows my mother, knows her light, and I wonder if it's waiting for her to return. I keep the lights on, check the locks, avoid the stairs when I'm alone. The growl is silent, but it's there in the walls in the dark. I carry her story, and it's changed me. The world feels less certain, its shadows. Heavier, its silence is louder. I've asked others, shared the tale, hoping for clarity. Some say spirits, others energy. Some just shrug and call it fear. Anyway, thanks for listening. And well, wish me luck in this basement. I laugh, but it's hollow. I know what the basement can do, what it did to her. The house is ours, but not fully. We live above, but below something else rules. I've thought about going down, standing where she stood, listening for the growl. But I'm not her, not brave enough, not marked by her light. I've read about entities, about places that hold darkness, but none explain the breath, the grip, the force that fought her. Was it personal, or was she just there, a spark in its path? I don't sleep down there anymore. The basement is a memory, a warning, a question I can't answer. I check the door, make sure it's locked, listen for sounds that don't belong. My mother's safe, but she's different. Quieter, quicker to pray, slower to linger in dark places. The house hasn't spoken again, but it doesn't need to. Its growl, its hold, its claim, they're part of us now. A story we'll never outrun. The Vanishing Garden, the old two-story house in Lorain, Ohio, stood like a sentinel, its weathered boards whispering secrets from decades past. I lived in this two-story house. It was old, and there's just some things that are in that house that always left me puzzled, and in a bit of a total mystery. As a young child, I roamed its rooms, unaware of the weight of its history. My mother and father created this huge, beautiful garden. The garden was a riot of colors, roses and sunflowers, swaying under the sun. A masterpiece my parents tended with pride. My parents would throw some cookouts. The backyard buzzed with life during these gatherings, laughter and smoke curling into the air. But something about the house felt unsteady, as if it held a truth just out of reach. I was too young to name it, but the air seemed to hum with a quiet warning. The gatherings were a whirlwind of noise and warmth. My dad would invite his work or drinking buddies over, and Mom would invite her people as well. Friends and neighbors spilled across the lawn, their voices blending with the sizzle of the grill. The floor model stereo would be out to play in the background. Dad would be socializing with his people. The grill is grilling. Music floated from the bulky stereo, a backdrop to Dad's booming laugh. My light blue kiddie pool would be filled up with water. I splashed in the shallow pool, the water cool against my skin. A front yard would be out of parking spaces. The driveway was spoken for, so the rest would just have to park their cars in the backyard where we were. Cars lined the grass, their tires sinking into the soft earth. Amid the chaos, I felt safe, cocooned in the familiar. Then, inexplicably, I wandered. I decided to walk around the house by myself for some reason, but I had no reason for doing so. But I was just walking. My small feet carried me to the front yard, the chatter fading behind me. I found myself in the front yard alone, so I decided to continue journeying around the house into a full, complete circle. I circled the house, tracing its edges, curious and unafraid. When I had done that, I came to a shocking discovery. Though everything and everyone was suddenly gone, the world shifted gone. Were the pool, the stereo, the cars, the people. I mean the pool, the stereo, people, cars, even the garden was gone. What was once a garden was nothing but a bed of grass now. The vibrant garden was now a flat expanse of grass, lifeless and wrong. But here's the weird thing, I can still hear everyone. Yet their voices lingered faint but clear, as if trapped in another layer of reality. My heart pounded. This wasn't a dream. Yes, I was awake. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just seeing things in dreams. I stood frozen, a child grappling with an impossible truth. When talking about dreams, you only know about 5% of the dream. And it's all over the place when telling it right, but in this case, I remember everything. The clarity was searing every detail, etched into my mind. The way that I've explained it here is the way that I've explained it for almost 40 years now as well. I tried the circle again and again, each time the same emptiness where life had been. Ever since, I've always been convinced that I've found what seemed like a portal, and so I kept doing it. It was the same result every single time. Everything was gone. I wondered if I'd stumbled into a rift, a place where the world unraveled. Sometimes, I often wonder what would have happened to me if I had just kept walking circles around the house without stopping. What if I'd kept going? Would I have vanished, a name lost to time? Would I have happened to become a missing persons case, or someone erased from memory altogether? As an adult, I carried the mystery, sharing it only to face laughter or doubt. I've talked about my experiences with other people, but all I get back is snickering, made fun of, or laughed at off as being unbelievable. The dismissal stung, but my story never wavered. I was excited to show my wife and kids the first house that I lived in. I was also excited about the thought of actually getting some answers and putting to bed this mystery. I returned with my family, eager to confront the past. But when approaching the house, all we arrived to was an empty lot. The house was gone, replaced by a barren lot, as if it had never existed. I felt sad, sort of ticked off, and beyond disappointed all that. I have a what seems to be made-up stories. But still, I live with this mystery. Grief and frustration welled up, the answers I sought erased. I would really like to try and get some answers as to what this was. And I'm really hoping that someone somewhere has had something similar happen to them. Or has an answer, or at least some thoughts. The garden. The voices. The house. They haunted me, a puzzle, locked in a child's memory, begging for a truth I might never find. The whistling in the woods, the forest beyond the house, was a wall of secrets, its trees whispering threats that only the night could hear. Jasper, alone with his German shepherd Max, thought his rural retreat was safe, but something stirred in the dark. It wasn't human nor animal. It was something else. Something that mocked the living with its twisted mimicry. When Max's cries shattered the silence, Jasper felt it, a presence, watching, waiting to cross the line into his world. And then from the woods came a sound that turned his blood to ice. A whistle human, yet wrong, calling from the shadows. I live about 30 minutes out of the city in a wooded area. Closest neighbors are about 2 to 3 mil down the road. Jasper's home was a solitary outpost, surrounded by dense forest, the nearest lights miles away. And this could have very well been a human, which is a lot more scary to me, to be honest. But I'm really not so sure. The isolation was both comfort and curse, leaving him exposed to whatever lurked beyond the trees. I thought that I would share this here, as it very much felt paranormal and made my hair stand up. The memory of that night clung to him, a chill that wouldn't fade. So last night I was woken up by my dog crying at the back door. Max's whimpers were sharp, urgent, unlike his usual calm demeanor. Jasper stirred, his heart quickening. I think to myself, that's weird, as he never needs to be let out at this time. Max was a creature of routine, sleeping soundly through the night. I get up and turn on the porch lights and let him out. The porch light flickered, casting a weak glow over the backyard. He was hesitant to go out when I opened the door, which was also weird for him. Max lingered at the threshold, his hackles raised, eyes locked on the darkness. But I watch as he runs over to the back fence and starts barking. His barks were feral, a guttural snarl that echoed like a warning. This wasn't his normal bark, too. He basically sounded like Cujo alarmed, as I've never seen him that distressed. I open the door and call out to him to come back inside. Jasper's voice trembled, swallowed by the night. This was when I hear it whistling, but it sounded like someone whistling a song. The melody was clear, deliberate, a human tune twisted into something unnatural. I don't see anything at this point, but still freaked out because, well, I'm not sure who the heck would be out at my property at this time, let alone at all. Really, the forest was private, forbidden trespassers were rare. Yet the whistling felt close, too close. I'm desperately trying to get him to come in, but he's fixated on whatever he's barking at. Jasper darted inside, his pulse racing. I run to the kitchen to grab his treats, hoping to bribe him inside. The treat bag rattled in his shaking hands. I come back to the door, and I hear someone or something barking back at my dog, but in a high-pitched voice. The sound was grotesque, a human voice mimicking a dog's bark, shrill and mocking. In fact, it sounded like when a human barks like a dog, if that makes sense. It wasn't Max, it was something else taunting from the trees. I look towards where the noise is coming from, and can barely make out what looked like, I don't know, glowing eyes. Twin orbs, faint, but piercing, glinted from the forest's edge, unblinking, predatory. The whistling starts again for a moment from that direction too. The tune resumed sharper, now cutting through Max's snarls. And as soon as I shook his treats and called out to him, I hear a very loud and deep growl. Not from my dog. Definitely not from my dog. The growl was monstrous, deep and resonant, shaking the air with rage. It didn't sound human either, but that noise sounded like a very mad, very large animal or something like that. It wasn't a bear, not a cougar. Nothing natural could carry that weight of menace. My dog comes running in through the door straight past me and his treats right into his crate. Max bolted tail, tucked trembling as he dove into his crate. I slammed the door behind him and lock it, brought him into the room with me and barricade us in there till daylight. Jasper dragged furniture against the door, his hands shaking, Max panting beside him. Now I could reason that the growling could be a bear, or maybe a mountain lion. But what was the whistling and the human-like barking? No animal whistled tunes. No human barked like that. Not unless they weren't human at all. I'm really not sure what it was, but it was enough to scare my dog to the point where he was trembling and panting. Max, a fearless German shepherd, was reduced to a quivering mass, his eyes wide with terror. He's a German shepherd, and he's a big, brave boy most of the time. In fact, I've never really seen him that upset. The sight broke Jasper's heart, fueling his own fear. I'll admit too that I am terrified, and hope that whatever that was never happens again. Dawn brought no answers. Jasper ventured out Max at his side to check the fence. The ground was undisturbed, no tracks, no claw marks, nothing to explain the night's horrors. But the air felt wrong, heavy, as if the forest was watching. He asked a neighbor, an old hunter, about local wildlife. The man frowned, mentioning old stories of things in the woods, neither man nor beast, known to mimic voices to lure. "They whistle to draw you out," he said, his eyes dark. Jasper laughed it off, but the words stuck a splinter in his mind. The whistling returned, not the next night, but soon after, faint drifting from the trees. Max growled, refusing to leave the house. Jasper installed floodlights, a camera, but the footage showed only shadows too vague to name. One night, he found scratches on the fence, too high for a bear, too deliberate for claws. He didn't tell anyone, fearing they'd call him crazy. But he slept with a rifle by the bed, how Max pressed against him. The forest wasn't empty. It was alive, and it knew his name. Jasper doesn't walk the property at night anymore. He keeps the lights on, the doors locked, and Max's crate in his room. The whistling hasn't stopped. It's softer now, teasing, waiting for him to step too close to the trees. Whatever it is, it's patient, and it's not done with him yet. The man on the stump. The forest at night is a different world, one that doesn't belong to us. I was 8 on a camping trip with a rowdy group of boys and their dads. Our tents pitched in a wide clearing under a sky full of stars. But when I slipped out into the dark, needing to relieve myself, the woods weren't what I expected. They were waiting, and something in them was waiting for me. I stepped toward the tree line, the campfire's glow fading behind me. The air was cool, the kind that makes your breath catch, but it wasn't the cold that stopped me. The forest went silent, completely, unnaturally silent. No crickets, no wind, no rustle of leaves under my sneakers. I could feel the ground beneath me, the crunch of twigs, but the sound was gone, swallowed by something I couldn't see. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Deeper into the trees, I found a clearing, small and perfect, like it had been carved out of the night. On a stump in the center stood a figure, tall and robed, bathed in a soft, glowing light. His face was a blur, shrouded in haze, but his presence was calm, almost familiar. I wasn't afraid. Not then. Not yet. We talked. I don't know how long or what about, but his voice was steady, like a teacher or an old friend. The words felt important, like they were meant to stay with me, but they slipped away, lost in the fog of memory. The forest stayed silent, the world holding its breath. And for that moment, it was just us, me, and this man, who wasn't a man, in a place that wasn't quite real. When I walked back to camp, the silence broke, and the world rushed in. A chaperone grabbed me, his face, pale, voice sharp. They'd been searching for hours, combing the woods, calling my name. Hours, it felt like minutes, maybe 10, 15 at most. I tried to explain, but the words sounded childish even to me. The man, the light, the stump, it was too much for them, and maybe for me too. When I was around 8 years old, I went on a weekend camping trip with a big group of people, mostly boys around my age, and their dads. Our tents were sprawled across a clearing, laughter and campfire smoke filling the air. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee, so I crawled out of the tent without waking anyone up. Our tents were in a big clearing, so I walked over to the tree line to find a spot. That's when it happened. All of a sudden, the forest went quiet. I remember noticing specifically that I couldn't even hear the leaves crunching underneath my feet anymore, though I could feel them as I walked. I kept going, drawn by something I couldn't name. A moment later, I walked up on some sort of spirit that looked like a man in robes standing on top of a stump. He had a glowing light around him, and his facial features were blurred, like there was a haze around his face. Weirdly, I wasn't scared at all. We talked and stayed there together for a while. His presence was warm, not threatening, like he'd been waiting for me. Beast. The words we shared felt heavy, meaningful, but they've faded, leaving only the feeling behind. When I left the clearing, the forest came alive again. Crickets win the snap of twigs underfoot. When I finally walked out of the tree line back to the camp, one of the chaperones immediately ran up to me, frantic, saying they'd been looking for me for a long time. Hours, in fact, and asking where I'd been. I was confused by that, because that conversation felt like all of 10-15 minutes. I told him that I had to use the bathroom and met an angel in the woods. He looked at me like I was making it up. He just dismissed it and sent me back to my tent. I climbed back into my sleeping bag. The camp quiet now. The other boys snoring softly. To this day, I wish so badly that I could remember what we talked about, but I have no idea. As a kid, I didn't dwell on it. As a kid, I didn't think twice about it, and continued my camping trip like nothing even happened. The next day, I ran through the woods with my friends, played by the stream-roasted marshmallows like it was just another adventure. It wasn't until I was older, looking back on the experience, that I realized just how strange it all was. The memory haunts me now, not with fear, but with questions. What was he? Why me? Why can't I remember? I've told the story a few times to friends, to family, but it never feels complete. Has anyone ever had something happen to them like this? And if they have, what was it? I've heard of missing time of encounters in the woods, but nothing quite like this. The man on the stump wasn't a ghost, wasn't a monster. He was something else. Something that didn't belong to this world, but wasn't out to harm me. I've been back to the woods since, not that exact spot, but places like it. The forest is never as quiet as it was that night, never as still. I listen for it sometimes, that silence, hoping for a clue, a whisper of what I lost. I wonder if he's still out there standing on his stump, waiting for another kid to wander too far. I wonder if he'd remember me. The camping trip stopped as I grew up, but that night stayed with me. Every rustle in the dark, every shadow that doesn't quite fit, makes me think of him. I don't know what we said, but I feel it like a promise I forgot to keep. The forest knows, and maybe somewhere he does too. I'm not a kid anymore, but I still look for him. Not in the woods, not really, but in the quiet moments when the world feels too still. I don't know if I want to find him again, or if I'm afraid I will. But that night, that man, that light, they changed me, and I'll carry them until I understand why. The Bone Watcher, the forest whispered secrets the mountains kept. I grew up in its shadow where the trees stood close, their branches weaving a canopy that swallowed the light. My home was a haven, but the woods beyond held something else, something that watched. Was it the wind rustling the leaves, or a presence older than the hills? Waiting for me to notice, I felt it most when I crossed the patch of trees to my friend's house, a path I knew by heart, yet never trusted. The sisters saw it first. Their house, tucked in a quiet hollow, was a place of laughter and games. But that day, the air felt wrong. We gathered in their backyard, the trampoline creaking under our weight, the world spinning as we jumped. Then the younger sister froze, her eyes fixed on the neighbor's fence, her voice trembling with fear. The younger sister started acting weird when asked. She said that she was seeing something on the far side of the next-door neighbor's fence every time that she jumped. What was it? And why did it choose her? We all saw it. One by one, we all tried it. and we all could see, well, something. A shape indistinct at first, crouched beyond the fence, moving when we moved, watching when we stopped. At first, we dismissed it as the neighbor's big, fluffy dog. We laughed, shaking off the chill, and ran inside to warn the neighbor. But the sisters' eyes held a truth we didn't yet grasp, a shadow that lingered in their gaze. Their room told a darker tale. We went upstairs to the sisters' room, but while up there, they started telling us about a skeletal figure that would enter their room at night and watch them. The younger sister told us about one time she threw a pillow at it, and it hit the figure. The image burned into me, a creature of bone, silent, staring, untouched by the world. They think that it gets up there by climbing the gutter pipe next to their window. The pipe rusted, and loose was a ladder for something that didn't belong. The sound broke us. We all went quiet because we were scared, of course, when we heard like a clicking outside the window that clearly sounded like metal. The noise was sharp, deliberate, a claw on iron echoing from the pipe. My heart stopped. My breath caught as the room became a cage, the window a door to terror. We all dashed out of the door and downstairs to the adults because we were thoroughly freaked out. The adults laughed, but their voices were thin, their eyes darting to the dark beyond the house. We fled to safety, the barbecue forgotten. I had my dad carry me home because I was too scared to look into the dark woods. The trees loomed their shadows alive, and I buried my face in his shoulder, refusing to see what might wait. The woods had always been mine, but now they belonged to something else, something that knew my path. I didn't believe the sisters fully. Not then, but their words clung to me, a seed of fear that grew in the dark. The truth came later. I saw the thing myself. It was late evening, and I was heading inside after playing in the woods when I saw it peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked like a skeleton, except a sharper with spiky protrusions around its joints, and it had red pinprick lights in its hollow eye sockets. Its form was wrong too, angular, too alive, its eyes burning with a light that wasn't fire. I pretended that I didn't see it, and I just hurried inside. My legs shook, my breath shallow as I locked the door, praying it wouldn't follow. It didn't leave. That night I woke up to something scratching at the wall under my window. The sound was relentless, a claw dragging across wood, demanding I look. In fact, I would wake up multiple times a week to the scratching. It was like something was trying to get my attention, so I would look outside. I never did my fear stronger than my curiosity, but the sound was always there, a call from the dark. Exactly what spot I was hearing the scratching coming from was tall enough for an adult human to reach their arms up at. And this entity. It was adult, hum-sized for sure. It was no animal, no trick of the wind. It was deliberate, personal. I learned its rhythm. I never did look. I was too scared. But the scratching happened for years until I moved out of that house. The nights were a battle, my room a fortress I didn't trust. The scratching wasn't random. It wanted me, wanted my eyes, my fear. I'd lie awake, counting the scrapes, praying for dawn. The woods held it, but the house was its stage, my window, its door. It wasn't alone. That wasn't the only time that I saw the thing in the woods. I'd catch glimpses, red lights flickering between trees, a skeletal shape darting out of sight. Each sighting was a reminder. It knew me, followed me, waited for me. I never saw it again after I moved, so it must consist there, or whatever. The mountains kept it bounded to the trees, the pipe the dark. The house was never the same. I stopped crossing the woods alone, stopped playing near the trees. The sisters' stories echoed in my mind, their fear now mine. Had they seen it too after they left, or was it mine alone? A shadow that chose me. I asked my dad, my friends, but they shook their heads. their smiles uneasy. The mountains were full of stories, but this one was different, warper real. I tried to explain it away. I don't tell this story a lot, because people always dismiss it as just a deer. A deer didn't scratch for years, didn't climb pipes, didn't watch with red eyes. That would have had to have been one consistent deer scratching at my wall 3 to 4 times a week for at least 3 years straight. Which to me, that just doesn't add up. No animal moved like that, looked like that, wanted like that. I searched for answers for tales of bone creatures, but found only whispers, myths that didn't fit. The woods kept their secret. I'd walk the path years later, older, braver, but never at night. The trees were just trees, the fence just wood. But I felt it still a weight, a gaze, a memory that didn't fade. Was it gone? Or was it waiting, hidden in the roots, the shadows? I didn't look too long, didn't linger. The woods weren't mine anymore. They belonged to it. I left the mountains, the house, the scratching. My new home was quiet, its nights empty. But I carried the forest with me. I'd wake sometimes, heart racing, certain I'd heard that sound again, that claw on wood. The creature was gone, but its eyes, its spikes, its hunger, they lived in me, a story I couldn't unlearn. I kept my windows locked, my curtains drawn, my dreams guarded. I don't share this often. The world dismisses what it doesn't understand, but I know what I saw, what I heard. The sisters knew it too, their fear a mirror of mine. What was it and why us? I've read about spirits, cryptids, things that stalk the wild, but none match the precision of its watch, the rhythm of its scratch. Was it tied to the mountains, the house, or something we brought to it? The house stands still, the woods unchanged. I drive past, sometimes slowing near the trees, searching for those red lights. It looks peaceful, ordinary, but I know it's truth. The creature is there in the dark, climbing, scratching, waiting for someone new. I don't stop. Don't walk the path. It doesn't need me, but it knows me, and I'll never forget its face. I live differently now. The world feels wilder, its edges sharp with possibility. I sleep with a light on, check the windows, listen for sounds that don't belong. The scratching stopped, but its echo remains a reminder of what the mountains hide. I don't go into the woods at night, don't look too long at shadows. The creature was a moment, but it reshaped me, taught me fear in a way I can't unlearn. The mat at the bus stop, the small market town in England, was eerily still, its cobbled streets empty under a pale sky. I went into my small town to purchase it. I was a scrawny teenager, clutching my newly bought WWE game, the glossy cover sparking joy. After purchasing the game, I was in awe of the cover and the synopsis on the back of the game, so I sat on a bench to read it. And taking the excitement of buying this new game, I settled onto a worn bench, the game's vibrant artwork pulling me in. I lived in a small market town in England, so Sundays were often very quiet. The town's silence was comforting, a cocoon for my excitement. But a shadow moved across the street, a figure that didn't belong. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. He emerged from the quiet, his steps deliberate. While sitting on the bench, I looked over to the bus stop across the road and noticed a strang-looking, scraggly man walking towards me. His clothes were tattered, his face marked by a jagged scar, glinting jewelry catching the light. I was a bit nervous seeing this, because although I was 13 or 14, I looked about maybe 11, as I was very small. I felt small, vulnerable. My young frame no match for his looming presence. On his approach, he asked me, "What's that you're holding?" I explained. It was my new game. I held up the game. voice shaky, hoping he'd leave. I then said, look, I need to go to my brother. He's waiting for me in the mall." Although he wasn't, I felt like I needed to say this just to get away. The lie slipped out a shield against the growing unease. His eyes narrowed, unyielding. I stood, heart racing, and started walking. As I walked off, the man began to follow me, asking my name, my age. His questions were relentless, each one a step closer. I replied Lee, which was a fake name, and told him a fake age. I lied, hoping to throw him off. On entering the mall, I started walking quicker and quicker, but I didn't want to start running as to for some reason I wanted to say. Face, I guess. The mall's bright lights offered no safety. His shadow clung to me, but he kept asking if I had a girlfriend, and as he got closer, I noticed he had a scar down his face, and also lots of jewelry on. His scar was vivid, his jewelry clinking softly. To his question, I responded, "Yes," as I thought it may put him off if he knew that I had a girlfriend. Another lie, desperate to deter him. Panic surged as he closed the gap. I then ran into a shop in the mall and started flicking through the magazines, but he persisted with the questions. I ducked into a shop, pretending to browse, but his voice followed, probing, unyielding. I then got up the courage to run as fast as I could, but he began to chase me. Fear overtook pride, and I bolted, legs pumping, the game clutched tight. Eventually I got away, and when I got home, I didn't tell my parents, and I just went upstairs and played my game. I stumbled home breathless and hid in my room, the game a fleeting distraction. But later that day, I told my mom, and she called the police immediately. My mother's face paled as I confessed. She acted swiftly. I then had to go to a police station local to myself and tell them what happened, and pick him out of a number of photos that police had on a laptop. At the station, I faced a gallery of faces, my finger pausing on his. And when I found him, apparently, this man had kidnapped and done many terrible things to many young boys, and I was just lucky enough to have escaped him. The officer's words chilled me. He was a predator, and I'd narrowly escaped. The truth sank in, heavy and cold. I replayed the chase, his scar, his questions each moment sharper in hindsight. Why me? The town, once a safe haven, felt tainted, its quiet streets now hiding threats. I kept the game but rarely played it. Its cover a reminder of that day. Telling friends brought no relief. They brushed it off, unable to grasp the fear. My mother's vigilance tightened her warnings, echoing in my head. I wondered about the other boys, the ones who didn't run fast enough. The police never shared more, but his face haunted me, a shadow I couldn't outrun. I was lucky, but the weight of that luck lingered, a silent scar from a day that could have ended in darkness. The haunting that wasn't. The old farmhouse creaked with secrets, its walls alive with the echoes of 4 generations, whispering tales of the dead. For Clara, the paranormal was as familiar as the scent of hay, a constant companion in a house that never slept. Doors swung open, footsteps echoed, and shadows danced in doorways. But none of it frightened her until tonight. What she thought was another ghostly prank turned into a chilling truth, one that roared away in a silver truck. In a home where spirits roamed freely, the real danger was the one she never saw coming, hiding behind the veil of the supernatural. My house has, for as long as I can remember, at least had major levels of paranormal activity. The farmhouse, weathered and proud, was a living archive of Clara's family, its timbers soaked in history. It's an old farmhouse house that's been passed through about 4 generations of my family, and there have been plenty of deaths on the property too. Her grandmother passed in the nursery, her great-grandfather plummeted from the loft, and an unmarked Civil War grave lay forgotten in the fields. It was built around 1880, and while it's not got a particularly bloody past, It definitely has its stories. The house wore its past lightly, its hauntings more curious than cruel. Activity is as common as a housefly around here, really. Cabinets and doors open and shut. Things get moved. Footsteps in the hall. When nobody else is home, figures in doorways. A cup would slide across the counter, a shadow flicker in the hall, each event as routine as the sunrise. We hear a voice in the old grain silo sometimes, which is impossible, because if someone was in there, that they'd suffocate. The silo's whispers were faint, almost mournful, yet never threatening. None of it feels or acts malicious. So I guess we're just used to it, and sort of take it on the chin for the most part. Clara and her family shrugged off the oddities, their lives intertwined with the unseen. I'm sewed to it, in fact, that I completely ignored someone trying to break into my back door last night, because I just thought that it was the normal activity. Clara was in her brother's room tweaking his PC when the familiar sounds began. I was in my brother's room fiddling with his PC for some stuff, and I heard weird knocking sounds from outside the house. The knocks were sharp, insistent, unlike the house's usual playful taps. Knocking is sort of normal here, but it's usually inside. But in the end, I just went ahead and ignored it. She dismissed it, her mind on the screen, assuming the spirits were restless. This went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before my dog started growling really loudly. The growl was deep, primal, cutting through the house, so loudly in fact that I could hear him from across the house. Rusty, their hound, was unflappable, save for his unease at the basement door. He really doesn't growl at anything besides the basement door, so I thought that that was a bit weird. Clara's stomach tightened. This wasn't the house's usual tricks, and I went to go and cal him down in the living room. She hurried to the living room. Rusty's growls growing louder, his eyes fixed on the kitchen. I heard the back door in the kitchen shaking and yelled, "Stop it! You're going to break the handle!" The door rattled violently, as if pushed by force. Because that's just the sort of thing that we say when something is getting particularly rough. Clara's voice was sharp, scolding the unseen, as she always did. And maybe 30 seconds later, I hear the door swing open, and without really thinking about it, I yelled, "I'm pretty sure I told you to knock it off." The words were automatic, a reflex born of years with ghostly housemates, and I didn't realize anything was actually wrong until a voice that I didn't recognize cursed super loud, and the door slammed shut. The curse was harsh, human, and utterly alien in her haunted home. Of course, I immediately ran to see what it was, just in time to see a silver truck peeling out of my driveway. Headlights flashed, tires screeching as the truck vanished into the night, leaving Clara frozen, her heart pounding. It wasn't a ghost. The realization hit like a slap, shattering her sense of safety. Someone had been there, flesh and blood, trying to break in. Rusty whimpered, pressing against her legs, his bravery gone. Clara locked every door, checked every window, her hands shaking as she gripped a flashlight. Had they been watching her? The house's spirits had never cursed, never fled. She'd mistaken a real threat for a familiar haunt. What if she hadn't yelled? The thought coiled in her gut, cold and heavy. She called her brother, who was away, and told him everything. He urged her to install cameras, a lock for the gate. Clara agreed, but the violation lingered, tainting the house's eerie charm. The spirits were harmless, but humans weren't. She searched the property at dawn, finding boot prints near the door, too fresh to be old. Had they come before, hidden by the house's noises? A neighbor mentioned a string of break-ins nearby, silver trucks, spotted at odd hours. Was it them, or something else using the house's reputation as cover? The hauntings felt different now. The footsteps, the whispers, they were no longer just quirks. Clara listened harder, wondering if each creak was a spirit or a stranger. One night, Rusty growled at the silo, But no voice came, only silence heavier than before. She kept a bat by her bed, the dog close, and the lights on. The house was still hers, but its ghosts were no longer her only company. So yeah, essentially, just a warning not to get too comfortable with your haunted housemates, because it might turn out that it wasn't them after all making the noise. The lesson was bitter. In a home full of spirits, the real monsters drove trucks. The whisper by the lake. The forest in northern Sweden doesn't sleep. It watches. I was 15, spending a summer at our family's cabin, a lonely outpost perched on a hill above a quiet lake. The dense woods around us swallowed everything, leaving only the water and the stars visible from our windows. That night, we thought a fire by the lake would be peaceful, a chance to talk and stargaze. But the forest had other plans, and it wasn't alone. We trudged down the hill, a small group, my dad, my sister, my cousins, their dad, and 2 dogs trailing behind. The air was crisp, the kind that bites at your fingertips, but the fire warmed us as we settled by the water. The lake reflected the flames, and for a while, it was perfect. Then I felt it a prickle on my neck, a weight in the air, like eyes boring into me from the trees. The silence grew heavier, the kind that makes you hold your breath. Our voices faded, the conversation dying, but no one spoke of the unease creeping in. I tried to shake it to focus on the fire, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Something was watching us from the woods. It wasn't just me. The dogs sensed it too, their ears twitching. Bodies tense, staring into the dark. Then my dad broke the silence, his voice casual, but out of place. "Yeah, I'm good." We all turned confused. No one had asked him anything. He looked at my cousin puzzled and said it again like he was answering a question. The air tightened, the fire's warmth fading. Something was wrong, and we all felt it now, a presence that didn't belong, hovering just out of sight. Dad's face changed as he explained. He'd felt a breath on his neck, a hand on his shoulder, a whisper in his ear. Soft, polite, but not human. The dogs confirmed it, their low growls cutting through the night eyes, fixed on the woods behind us. We didn't wait to find out what was there. The fire was at our feet, pounding the path back to the cabin, the forest's gaze burning into our backs. This story takes place in a very remote wooded area in northern Sweden. At the time, I was about 15 years old. My family and my cousin's family were staying at our summer cabin, placed on a hill. At the bottom of the hill, there was a lake with a wooden bridge and 2 boats. The property is surrounded by a dense forest, so the only thing you could really see when looking out the window is the hill leading down to the lake and boats. One evening, my dad, my sister, my 3 cousins, and their dad decided to light a fire down by the lake. My grandparents, aunt, and mom stayed behind. We just wanted to look out at the lake, stargaze a bit, and chat. We brought our grandparents' dog and our cousin's dog out with us. We made our way down, the dogs bounding ahead, their collars jangling in the quiet. We walked down to the lake, lit the fire, and started talking. The flames crackled, casting shadows on the water, and for a while it was just us and the night. After about maybe an hour, the conversation had sort of fizzled out. But the silence was comfortable, or so I thought. Suddenly, I started feeling a bit off, and just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the woods. We were sitting with our backs facing the woods and the cabin. The unease grew, a knot in my stomach I couldn't ignore. The feeling was unsettling, but I tried thinking about other things. Then out of nowhere, my dad just says, "Yeah, I'm good." We all turned baffled. There was no conversation. No question. Everyone turned to look at my dad in confusion. Dad looks back at the cabin, and then at my cousin, who was sitting next to him, and said, "I'm doing good." What? My cousin, equally puzzled, replied, "You asked me how I was doing." So I answered, "Dad said I didn't ask you anything." My cousin frowned, saying Dad looked confused. Dad said that he had felt someone lean over and whisper in his ear, "Hello? How are you?" He described feeling whatever it was, breathe on his neck, and put a hand on his shoulder. He thought it was my mom at first, turned to look, but saw nothing. He assumed it was one of us playing a trick. The air turned cold, the fire's light dimming in my eyes. Right after explaining this, the two dogs that were with us started growling loudly while looking behind where my dad was sitting towards the woods. Their hackles were up, teeth bared, staring into the darkness. We all freaked out, put out the fire, and started running towards the cabin. Our footsteps echoed on the wooden bridge, the dogs racing ahead as we scrambled up the hill. The cabin's lights were a beacon, but the forest felt alive, its presence chasing us. We burst through the door, breathless, slamming it shut. My grandparents looked up startled as we spilled out the story. Dad's whisper the dogs, the feeling of being watched. They didn't laugh, but they didn't believe it either, suggesting the wind or our imaginations. We haven't gone outside the cabin when dark ever since then. It's a memory that I'll never forget. The cabin, once a haven, felt different after that, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Whatever it was nice enough, I suppose, to ask how Dad was doing, so I don't think it had bad intentions. But it wasn't human, and it wasn't safe. The only thing I can think of is Swedish nature spirits called Vitra, known for tricks, but also for burning homes or taking people who disturb them. They aren't really known for being nice, so I'm not sure. If anyone has any idea as to what this could have been, I'd love to know. I've read about Vitra since their dual nature, playful yet dangerous. But this felt different, almost personal, years later. I've gone back to the cabin. But never at night, never by the lake. The woods are still there, thick and unyielding, and I feel it sometimes, that weight, that watchfulness. My cousins avoid talking about it, but my dad doesn't. He says he still feels that breath sometimes in quiet moments, like it's checking in. I don't know what it was, but it knew us, and it wanted us to know it was there. The lake is still beautiful, but I don't trust it anymore. The cabin sits on that hill. The boats bob on the water, but the forest keeps its secrets. I tell myself it was a trick of the night, a story we exaggerated. But when I close my eyes, I see the fire, the dogs, the dark, and I hear that whisper asking a question it didn't need an answer to. I don't go into the woods anymore, not like I used to. The stars are still there. The lake still sparkles. But something else is out there too. It spoke to my dad. It saw us, and it's still waiting. I don't know for what, but I'm not going back to find out. The Lake Stalker. The lake was a mirror reflecting a night too cold to trust. We sat on its benches, my best friend and I, the gas station's neon glow fading behind us. The air bit our fingers sharp and unforgiving as we unwrapped our burgers, the faint haze of our joints curling into the dark. Was it the chill that made the world feel wrong, or something else? Something watching from the shadows. The water was still too still, its surface hiding what lay beneath. The shore wasn't empty. Across the lake, a figure moved, a silhouette, against the faint moonlight, pacing with a purpose that set my nerves on edge. We saw this guy, or maybe a better word is being, from the other side of the lake, like 500 meters away, pacing back and forth at the shore. Its steps were erratic too, deliberate, as if it knew we were there, kind of staring at us, or eyeballing us like we'd killed his mom or something. The gaze was heavy, hateful, pinning us to the bench. It didn't belong. He was very erratic, pacing back and forth and eyeballing us, like I said. The figure's movements were wrong, not human. a jerky rhythm that spoke of something older, something angry. We whispered to each other. Burgers forgotten. Our laughter replaced by a growing dread. When all of a sudden, this guy dives into the lake and starts swimming toward us. The splash was silent, the water barely rippling as if it welcomed him, invited him closer. He was too fast. We see him doing the butterfly swim method, but this guy is swimming so quickly, like a medium fast-paced jogging speed almost. The strokes were powerful, unnatural, cutting through the freezing water with a speed that defied reason. Our fingers ached from the cold, yet this thing moved like the lake was warm, like it wasn't human. Keep in mind, this is in Norway, and it was absolutely freezing outside, like our fingers hurt from holding the joint sort of cold. The water should have stopped him, slowed him, but it didn't. It fueled him. He was coming for us. While we're seeing this guy, we were just sort of WTFing to each other. Like, what is this guy doing? And he keeps getting closer and closer. His form grew clearer, humanoid, but wrong. His eyes locked on us across the shrinking distance. Panic clawed at my chest, my friend's voice shaking as we realized he wasn't stopping. We start to freak out a bit, and he was around 100 meters away when we just ran for our lives, like running as if there was a lunatic out there, and we were in danger. Our feet pounded the ground, the lake's edge a memory we couldn't outrun. The forest swallowed us, its trees a maze of shadow and fear. We just split off and we ran home. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. Was he still there? Climbing from the water, chasing us through the dark? The gas station's lights were gone, the lake a distant threat, but its presence lingered, a weight that followed me to my door. I locked it, checked it twice, my heart still racing, my mind replaying that impossible swim. We weren't alone in seeing it. We all saw the same thing, which seems very unlikely. My friend and I huddled later, our voices low, piecing together what we'd witnessed. The figure, the speed, the eyes. They were real, shared, undeniable. My friend and I talked about this, and it was really so eerie to talk about this with him. Others called it a crazy guy, a prank. But they hadn't felt its gaze, hadn't seen its strokes. When everyone else that I talked to, it just sounds like a crazy guy. But we have no idea what it was. It wasn't human. Not with that speed, not in that cold. The lake stayed with me. I avoided it after kept to the roads away from the water's edge. The benches were empty now. The gas station mundane, but I felt it still a pull. A whisper from the shore. Was it still there, pacing, waiting for me to return? I didn't go back. Didn't test it. The lake had claimed something that night. Something I couldn't name. The story didn't fade. I carried it a weight in my chest, a question I couldn't answer. I mean, it looked like a person, and well, humanoid at least. But the ability to swim so quickly across about 500 meters like that, in like 0 to 3 degrees seawater, is just kind of impossible. I tried to explain it, to rationalize it, but the math didn't add up. No human could move like that, not in water that cold, not with that purpose. I searched for stories, for legends of lake creatures, but found nothing that matched the figure's eerie precision. Others dismissed it. I don't know, maybe we were just high. But the high didn't explain the shared vision. The clarity of his form, the speed that haunted us. We weren't hallucinating, we were terrified, and terror sharpens the mind. I asked around, probed for tales of the lake, but the locals shrugged their eyes, avoiding the water. They knew something, or they didn't want to know, and I couldn't blame them. The lake is still there. I pass it sometimes driving, never stopping, never looking too long. Its surface is calm, deceptive, hiding what moves beneath. Is he still there, pacing the shore, diving into the dark, waiting for someone new. I don't walk its banks, don't sit on its benches. The lake doesn't need me, but it knows me, and I'll never forget its stalker. I live differently now. The world feels colder, its waters deeper, its shadows sharper. I lock my doors, keep the lights on, avoid lakes at night. The figure was a moment, but it reshaped me, taught me fear in a way I can't unlearn. I don't smoke anymore, don't linger in open spaces. The lake took something that night, and I don't want to know what else it wants. I don't tell this story often. People laugh, call it a high gone wrong, but my friend's eyes, my own. We know the truth. It wasn't a man, wasn't a trick. It was something else, something the lake holds, something that swims when it shouldn't, watches when it shouldn't. I'll never go back, never test the water. The stalker is there, and I'm not its prey. Not again. The girl beyond the wall. The backyard was my kingdom, a sprawl of grass and secrets tucked behind our modest home. I was playing in my backyard as usual. As a small child, I darted through the familiar space, chasing invisible adventures. And there's this concrete wall that separates our property from my neighbor's, who happens to be my uncle. The wall cracked, and crumbling stood like a weathered sentinel, marking the boundary to my uncle's land. The wall was like broken down on one part, and you could easily go through it to my uncle's side, but you'd have to walk through almost half a mile of weeds and tall grass to get there. The gap tempted exploration, but the tangle of weeds littered with trash and rumored rats kept me at bay. I knew that there were rats and some trash there too, so I just never really went back there though. I did play near the wall quite a lot. Yet I lingered near the wall, drawn to its mystery. The air felt heavy, as if the wall held a story it wouldn't share. I was lost in play, the world small and safe. I was doing just that while my mom talked to my grandparents in the kitchen. I couldn't see them, but they could see me and were close enough to hear. Mom's voice drifted from the house, a comforting hum. I was near the broken part of the wall when this other little girl appears out of nowhere on the other side. She stepped from the weeds, her presence sudden and startling. She was super friendly and looked a little older than me, I guess. Her smile was warm, her eyes bright with invitation. I remember her vividly wearing oversized bright blue jean overalls and a pretty straw hat. Her outfit was striking like a picture from a storybook. I remember describing her to my mom's farmer clothes. I called them farmer clothes. The denim loose, the hat shading her pale face. She looked like a Sarah illustration from the clothes, but she was very pale, had freckles, and straight. Kind of shoulder length, but maybe longer, is hair. Freckles dotted her cheeks, her hair a soft curtain framing her delicate features. My heart skipped. She was real, but where had she come from? We played time blurring in a child's joy. I have no recollection of what we talked about, or what we played, but that's what we did for like several minutes. Her laughter was a melody, her energy infectious. She told me her name was Margarita. Margarita, a name that felt both strange and perfect. She was really fun to be around, but I remember feeling weird about the fact that she wouldn't ever come to my side of the backyard yet. Was very insistent that I went to where she was. She stayed on her side, urging me to cross the gap. Of course I wouldn't because of the rats in the trash, and that I was very certain I wasn't allowed to go there too. Fear of rats and my parents' rules held me back. I remember though explaining this to her, and her looking sort of disappointed that I should ask my mom first. Her face fell a flicker of impatience crossing her eyes. I hesitated, caught between trust and caution. Her words pressed harder. Now this next part I remember very well. She insisted that my mom would be okay with it. That there's nothing bad like rats behind the wall. and that I shouldn't be afraid. She promised safety. Her voice soft but firm. Mind you, she didn't seem angry about my objections. She just seemed sort of annoyed that I wouldn't just trust her. Her annoyance stung, making me doubt myself. That made me feel very self-conscious enough to say that I'd go, but I still should tell my mom first. I agreed, swayed by her certainty, but insisted on checking with Mom. Anyway, I don't remember her reaction to that, but I thought that she would be happy that I said yes in the end. I expected her to smile to wait. So I run back inside and explain to the situation she's understandably weirded out, since that is not connected to the street or anything. I bolted to the kitchen, words tumbling out, and the only other girls who would go there beside me didn't fit the description at all. My cousin was younger, and not at all like the girl that I described. Mom's face tightened. No cousin or neighbor matched Margarita. The other neighbors were too far away, and their kids didn't look anything like that either. Mom's doubt was palpable. But I remember she paused and starts talking in a way. Kid me is sure that she thinks that I'm playing, but I assure her slightly offended that Margarita wasn't imaginary. I protested, hurt by her disbelief. So we go outside so that we could meet her. I run back outside, so I get there first, and the whole thing couldn't have taken any longer than a minute, but I don't see her anymore. I race to the wall, but the gap was empty. Of course, I start calling out to her, thinking that she must be behind the wall. Shy, maybe. I shouted her name, peering into the weeds. My mom then begins talking like one does to a kid's imaginary friend. She's talking at nothing. Mom's voice turned playful, addressing an invisible friend. I'm annoyed as heck at this point, even writing this I am, because I know that I didn't make her up. Frustration burned. I knew she was real. I started looking around for her, but my mom was growing impatient, and she didn't like that I was about to go behind the wall, because I'm not allowed to, which annoyed me more because I knew that. But now, it looked like I didn't. Mom's warning about the forbidden gap only deepened my anger. Margarita was gone, and I was left to face disbelief. I waited, hoping she'd return. I expected her to come back, but after that, I never saw Margarita again. Which I can see is probably one of the reasons why my mom thought that I made her up. Days passed, but the wall stayed silent. It's more of a grandma name than a kid's, I suppose. Her name felt old, out of place for a child. Anyway, my mom surely noticed that I was expecting to see her again, so she acted like Margarita was there already. Mom humored me, weaving Margarita into games. I felt like I had an imaginary friend forced upon me, and I was still sad and angry, and I couldn't prove I was saying the truth. I resented it. My truth buried under her assumptions. But I guess I was just too little and easy to influence. So I too kind of made myself believe that I had an imaginary friend named Margarita. Just that now that she was imaginary, she wasn't the girl that saw. Because I did. I reshaped her in my mind, a butterfly like a Pokemon I loved, and instead a big butterfly like that. One butterfly Pokemon that I liked. I knew that she was imaginary, unlike the real Margarita that I met that day, and felt a bit silly playing with her. But it also felt nice and comfortable. It was a compromise. But the real Margarita, pale, freckled, insistent, never faded. So I had Margarita, the Pokemon rip-off butterfly, in my mind for a couple of years. But I never did forget about the real one, and the feelings of my mom not believing me. Her memory lingered sharp and vivid. Again, every time I told this story, it was around the topic of my mom not believing me, but everyone always acted spooked by it. Friends shivered, sensing something I couldn't name. Over the years, I started to feel a bit spooked myself too, I'll admit. But who knows, maybe I'm still too easy to influence, and I just don't know if it was real or not. The wall? The girl? The disbelief they haunted me, a childhood enigma. I couldn't resolve a question of truth I carried alone.